See, we've got an incredibly large number of guests this morning. Thanks everyone for signing up for this workshop. I think everyone is still just loading here. We've got lots of people loading into, coming out of the waiting room and joining our workshop this morning. Okay. Just watching my screen fill up with participants. All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I must right off the bat say how, on behalf of the organizing committee, how incredibly happy we are. I think very pleasantly surprised to see so many people register for this online workshop this morning. I think for us that I think is heartening and gives a clear indication that so many of us care so much about protecting the natural environment and our freshwater ecosystems. So we'll first start off with some introductions. So good morning, I'm Susan Miller. I am a planner working for the Parks Canada agency, and I work specifically providing planning services for the Rideau Canal National Historic Site and World Heritage Site, and the Trent Severn Waterway National Historic Site in central Ontario. I've been working for Parks, I think first started in 2006, and I work in the areas of long-term strategic planning, land use planning and development, and also cultural resource management. Before we delve into an overview of the agenda and what we hope to accomplish today, I did want to take an opportunity to introduce all the members of the organizing committee that have we've sort of pulled our resources, shared our skills, and pulled this workshop together over the last few months. If my colleagues don't mind, as I go through to introduce each one of you briefly, if you want to just turn your camera on if it isn't already, and maybe just give a hello. You can turn your mic on or just wave, so that way we can put a face to the name as we go through. So let's start with, and I'll have my, there we go. So we'll start off with Megan McDonald from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. We have Mike Yee from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority.
Hi, folks.
And I will say right off the bat, Mike was our spearheaded this initiative and has really been our leader through the organization. So Mike gets a special shout out right at the beginning. We have Haley Edson from the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority.
Hi, everyone.
We have Victor Castro and John Orpana from the Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks.
Everybody.
Hello.
We have, good morning, then myself from Parks Canada and my colleague Hilary Knack, who also works for the Rideau Canal National Historic Site.
Good morning, everybody.
And we have Terry Rees from FOCA, the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Associations.
Morning, everyone.
And we have, and I don't think Barb is able to join us this morning on camera, but we have Barb King, Darlene Coyle, from Watersheds Canada. Good morning, from Watersheds Canada. And we also have Monica Seidel and Chloe Lajoie, who are assisting us as well from Watersheds Canada. I think I've got everyone. So good morning. So good morning to all of you from all of us. So as I said, today's online workshop is looking at sustainable land use planning to support healthy shorelines, healthy waterfronts, healthy freshwater ecosystems. Sustainable land use planning is very much key to protecting the health and enjoyment of Ontario's lakes and rivers. With over 2 million lakes in Canada and 250,000 alone in Ontario, along with hundreds of rivers, there's a real opportunity, we feel, for municipal policies to be better informed by science and to help guide decision-making in a sustainable manner. Like many provinces in Canada, Ontario's economy is highly dependent on stable, healthy, and thriving natural environment to support ecotourism. We feel when land development is not well regulated, we all know that there can be negative impacts to the adjacent freshwater. For example, in 2020 alone, Ontario reported 91 blue-green algal blooms, which was a significant increase from 44 just 4 years prior in 2016. So this not only prevents waterfront property owners and the general public from enjoying the water, but it also can affect the biodiversity. It can have an impact on property values of those waterfront residents and the municipalities who are dependent on seasonal tourism. We feel that this area is certainly becoming of increasing interest and of greater importance as we start to experience climatic change. So when a few of us were having conversations earlier this year, we often get together and talk about common interests, goals, aspirations, challenges that we're facing along our waterways. And we kept coming back to vegetative buffers and the really incredibly valuable and very simple role that the vegetative buffers can play in protecting and supporting healthy waters. And so we feel that a natural, resilient, and low-impact method of buffering adjacent bodies from upland development is the simple planting of native vegetation along the shoreline. And we are approaching this from the mindset of striking a balance. So striking a balance between the needs of the landowners, whether that's for enjoying the view of the waterfront, water access to say a dock or a boathouse or a boat slip. So balancing those needs with the needs of nature. And so that both can thrive in that space. So for the next 3 hours, we're going to discuss the scientific benefits of natural shorelines, but we're really going to focus in on sharing information about the different types of policy and planning tools that are already available in municipalities that can help support protecting, restoring, retaining, maintaining vegetative shoreline buffers. And we have 3 examples from across the province as well to share with you about how those different municipalities are approaching this process. So I'm just going to quickly pull up my share a screen here. Give a high-level overview of the agenda for the day. Okay, I think all of you can see the agenda here. I've got pulled up on the screen. So we have a number of presentations today, and we also have an opportunity for a Q&A session with a panel of our speakers. So starting off here, and I'm also the timekeeper, and I realize I'm already out of time for my introductory remarks, but we'll let that slide. So we'll shortly be tucking into presentations. We have 2 presentations right off the bat, looking at the ribbon of life and the scientific reasons behind the value of shoreline buffers. And those are presentations by Mike Key and Victor Castro. And then Darlene's going to take us through an overview of the different types of municipal policy and planning tools that are available. Then about 10:15, and I'll say maybe probably about 10:30, we will stop for a 5-minute health break. And by all means, during the course of these three hours, feel free to, of course, get up as you need, but we will take a proper 5-minute break at about 10:30 once we finish up with Darlene's presentation. When we come back from break, we are then going to have presentations from three different municipalities, the Township of Rideau Lakes and the Township of South Frontenac in Central Ontario, and then presentation from Haliburton County. And they'll be speaking to how they are using policy and planning tools to protect their waterfront. After those three presentations, we'll then have a Q&A discussion with the panel of speakers. And then the last third of the presentation, we'll have, I think we've got 4 presentations in total, and those presentations will be speaking to the different types of public tools and stewardship programs that are available. So that sort of supplements the policy and planning tools, looking at some of the stewardship programs that are available for individual property owners. And then we'll just wrap up with a few quick closing remarks. So at this point in time, I did want to acknowledge and introduce Monica again. Monica is going to be facilitating this whole workshop with supporting us through some poll questions, some survey questions, the chat group, and the panel Q&A. So Monica is with Watersheds Canada as the Communications and Fundraising Manager. And she's been with Watersheds Canada for about 3 years now, focused on fundraising, engagement, organization, communications, and education outreach. And Monica comes to Watersheds Canada with an environmental science degree from Queen's University. So during the course of the next 3 hours, starting momentarily, we do have some questions to ask all of you. First of all, because we've got so many people here, we're really excited to learn about where you come from. So I think there's going to be a poll question popping up pretty soon on your screen that Monica will be pulling up. And we're just looking to find out where you guys are from. If you represent a particular group or an organization or a municipality, perhaps you're represent a lake association, or you're perhaps a planner with the municipality, or perhaps you're an elected official. So that poll question will be popping up soon, and we'd love for you to just take a few seconds to fill that in. Then during our, I think it's during, the next one will be during our break, we'll be having another question that's going to come up, and it's going to be in the chat function. And that question is asking all of you what your biggest concerns or interests are when it comes to waterfront development, healthy waters, healthy shorelines. So we'll have that as a question that'll come up during the break. So you can do that during the break exercise. Let's see, and to do that, I'm just checking my notes here. Those of you might be already familiar with the Zoom function, but basically the chat function is going to be at the sort of bottom center of your screen. And when we get to the Q&A breakout session at about 11:20, that's where you can pop your question into the chat function there. And Monica will be monitoring those questions coming in and helping to support the Q&A panel discussion. And then just a couple of the usual housekeeping items. This seminar is being recorded, and we're doing that so that we can then share it on Watersheds Canada's website. So we'll be sharing both the recording of the seminar and also the various resources and tools that we're going to share today. It'll all go up on Watersheds Canada website in the coming days, and it'll be within their Planning for Shorelands webpage. So everything will be up there. You can go back and refer to it, and there'll also be the presentations there as well. And then the last housekeeping, please, if you're not presenting, if it's not your turn to speak, then we ask if you could please mute your microphone so we can manage any feedback. So I think that's it for the introductory remarks. As a transition into our first presentation, which will be from Mike, we are going to have a very quick 1 minute from each member of the organizing committee to speak about their organization's interests and mandates and what brings them here today to help deliver the shoreline buffer workshop. So I think, Terry, we'll start with you with FOCA, and then we'll move over to Hillary with Parks Canada.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Pleased to be here this morning with all of you, and glad there's so much interest. I'm with the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association. We're a nonprofit organization that represents volunteer associations and individual property owners all across Ontario, and we envision thriving and sustainable waterfronts across Ontario now and for future generations. So FOCA advocates for healthy lakes and rivers and is the voice for Ontario's 250,000 plus waterfront property owners. And we've felt since the 60s when we were formed that protecting the quality of our lands, lakes, and rivers is essential to our continued success as a province. And we know that responsible private land stewardship supports healthy communities, our economy, and our overall well-being. Thoughtful land use planning, advice, and regulations can provide the guidance we need to accomplish important community-wide goals, including the sustainability of our waterways. And FOCA is pleased to work with and through our association members and individuals and alongside our partner organizations like the folks here today to sustain our healthy lakes and rivers. And you can always get more information at our website at foca.on.ca. And thanks for your interest today.
Thanks, Terry. Hillary, would you like to speak to Parks Canada's interests?
Yes, hi, there we go. I was trying to unmute. Sure, yeah, under the ecological component of our mandate, Parks Canada is committed to protecting the natural heritage of our special places and ensure that they remain healthy and whole. As a federal agency, we uphold federal laws such as the Species at Risk Act and the Federal Policy on Wetland Conservation. Under the cultural heritage component of our mandate, Parks Canada is committed to protecting the cultural heritage of our special places with the vision that they are a living legacy, connecting hearts and minds to a stronger, deeper understanding of the very essence of Canada. Within the Ontario Waterways Field Unit, which has responsibility for the Rideau Canal and the Trent Severn Waterway, there's a recognition that shorelines are integral to protecting and maintaining the quality of the lakes and rivers that comprise these systems, and that shorelines are key habitat areas that support many wildlife species, including those that are protected under the Species at Risk Act. For the Rideau Canal in particular, these adjacent lands also contribute to its significance as a National Historic Site. And as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the waterfront, meaning the shoreline area, falls within the 30-meter buffer zone, and activity in this area can have an impact on the cultural heritage and scenic values of the waterway. Yeah, thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Hillary. Over to MECP. Victor or John wanted to speak to the province. Okay, I think we've got.
Okay, it's John here. Sorry, I wasn't able to.
There we go, John.
Wasn't able to unmute. Sorry. I'm glad
okay.
to be here today and welcome everybody to participate. And it's great to see so many people are interested in shorelines and lake water quality. So the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks works to protect and sustain the quality of Ontario's air, land, and water. We also coordinate Ontario's actions on climate change in the name of healthier communities, ecological protection, and economic prosperity. We are currently also the administrators of the Species at Risk program for the province of Ontario. MECP works to protect, restore, and enhance the environment to ensure public health and environmental quality. And Ontario regulates large drinking water and sewage systems to ensure water safety and water quality. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Over to the conservation authorities.
Thanks, Susan. So on behalf of my fellow Conservation Authority colleagues, Mikey and Megan McDonald, and myself, thank you everyone for being here. Conservation authorities are local watershed management agencies mandated to ensure the conservation, restoration, and responsible management of Ontario's water, land, and natural habitats through programs that balance human, environmental, and economic needs. So through regulation of development and site alteration activities near water bodies, water courses, and wetlands, conservation authorities aim to ensure development is safe from natural hazards such as flooding and erosion, and to protect the natural environment while allowing for access to water-related recreational opportunities. With this workshop, conservation authorities are looking to see what tools are available to help balance the needs of the community and the individual with the needs of nature to protect shorelines and shoreline vegetative buffers. We understand there's a need for access to the lake. However, what do landowners need and not just want for access, and what can they leave or restore to protect lakes? Thank you.
Thanks, Haley. And Watersheds Canada.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So for the past 20 years, Watersheds Canada has been dedicated to protecting and restoring Canada's freshwater through collaborative and innovative projects. So it's through these collaborative initiatives that we've spoken to landowners, conservation authorities, lake and river associations, and municipal decision makers, and discovered a real disconnect between what we want to protect the lake and our desire to enjoy the waterfront. So in the face of increased development pressures, we, in collaboration with our project steering committee, have conducted a needs assessment of over 200 municipal councillors, planners, and lake and river associations from across Canada or across Ontario, and found that the top barriers to shoreline protection were competing interests between the environment and development, the lack of guidance from the province, and insufficient scientific knowledge among municipal decision makers. So I'm going to put the link to this report in the chat so you guys can take a look at it, but I'll elaborate on this later on in the workshop.
Great. Thanks so much, Darlene. So we're now going to head into our series of presentations. We're going to start with a presentation from Mike Yee with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, speaking to the ribbon of life, that valuable section of land along the waterfront. And Mike's going to give an overview of good land use planning practices and contrast that with some probably less desirable land use planning practices. Mike Yee, as I said, is with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. He's an environmental planner and a biologist at the RVCA, and with a foundation in biology from the University of Guelph. Mike has over a 30-year career working with the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority, the City of Ottawa, and now with the RVCA. Over those many years, Mike has had a number of roles, including biologist, naturalist, conservation education coordinator, a watershed watch coordinator, conservation area planner, environmental planner, and stewardship coordinator. So all those that diverse experience has been able to transfer many skills into technical review expertise in the assessment of wetlands, fish and aquatic habitats, surface water quality monitoring, and natural heritage assessments. Mike is also the founding member of the Mississippi Valley Field Naturalists. And as I said, he's presently an environmental planner and a biologist with the RVCA. So over to you, Mike.
Hi, folks. Thanks for that, Susan. So, yeah, the reason I gathered this group together and very thankful for this group to put this presentation together was that really wanted to get people thinking about shorelines, because shorelines, the vegetation on shorelines is really an easy solution to protecting lakes. And I have to say, for the most part, most people get that, but there's a lot of people that don't. And so that's where we need sort of better tools and better policies to get those that really don't want to sort of buy into it. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of the ribbon of life. And so really, when we're talking about the ribbon of life, we're talking about the living edge. We're talking about the area that starts in the water to where the water and sunlight penetrate down so that plants grow. And then these plants transition to semi-aquatic to terrestrial plants and basically into the floodplain. And that's your very dynamic transition zone. And within this zone, we get 90% the functions of rivers and lakes being there. So 90% of your life that lives around lakes and in your lakes and rivers need this area. And so it really needs to be a robust, resilient habitat. And that's really what we need to do is to look at it. And so what I really look at is when I meet with people, as Darlene said, disconnect. Try to see if there's a connect between what they say and what they do. And that connect is the shoreline. When I hear people say they love their lake, and then we walk back to the yard and we take a look to see what the area between the dwelling and the shoreline is, and if it's all grass right down to the lake, you're not loving your lake too much. Really, what you need to do is take what you need, right, for the access, but you can leave a lot for the lake. And so that's what we're trying to do is with this workshop, just and I know that this is probably preaching the converted here. You people that are here get this. We just need to get the word out, and we need to get the tools to help us do a better job with that. So we look at good side, bad side. For 30 years, we've been trying to do this. And for 30 years, we still get what becomes the bad side, which is 649 and Lotto Max is not helping us when they put their commercial about winning the millions and buying something in beautiful lake country. And what we really need to do is get people to buy into this, the vegetated shoreline with an access into the water. And what we need is most lake properties and cottage properties or permanent homes around lakes is somewhere in the middle of this, right? But the idea is we don't want this. We really need to get more vegetation here, and we can do that. And that's what we're hoping to do with this workshop. So, more vegetation, house setback, septic setback even further. Look to see what's happening with your runoff and your stormwater. Put as many plants or leave as many plants on the shoreline as you can, and have the access that you need to get down to the water. And really, that's what we're trying to do with protecting that ribbon. And the benefits for vegetative buffers: it maintains and improves water quality. Just leaving it, this is all the things that it does for you, right? It maintains, improves water quality, it protects the shoreline from erosion. It's better terrestrial and aquatic habitat for wildlife, and it maintains a natural water balance. And I bring natural water balance in because that's something that a lot of people don't consider either. And so what we have is plants are nature's green infrastructure. It's there, and it provides so many services that when we take it away, we have to pay for. We have to find a solution for that. Either if we take it away and we have erosion problems, we have to armor up and we have to put a lot of money into that. And that really doesn't do a lot for your lake. And we take away a filtering system that protects it. And so Victor's going to get into a lot more of that. But what we really want people to think about is the water balance. If you're on think of watersheds as having the general water balance of a natural watershed would be that's forested is going to be 40 to 60%. The precipitation, will either transpire or evaporate into the atmosphere. 30 to 50% infiltrates into the ground, and 10%, is what's going to run off, right? So think about that as natural systems. We don't have natural systems anymore. We're altering them. So what we're doing is we're going from what you see on the top left-hand corner, and most places we're going to have some development. And so what's happening is we're doubling the runoff. So we have to be considering that, because doubling the runoff means that we're having more water going into systems, which is going to cause more flooding. But not only does it go in and add more water, it carries nutrients and potentially pollutants with it. And so your natural riparian buffer going to provide all these ecological goods and services that you get from just leaving as much of your shoreline vegetated as possible. And as I said, erosion, when you take away those root systems, this is what happens. You start to lose a lot of your land, and then you've got to pay to make sure that stays where it's supposed to stay, and that costs money, and it's maintenance. And so the idea, I think, for living at the lake is not to do more work and put more money into it, but to have systems there that are going to work for you. And a vegetative buffer, it's a growing living system, and it protects the lake, and it protects your property and protects the land values. And so think of vegetation as being the skin of the lake. It's there and it protects it. And what's happening now is a lot of the incursions into those vegetated areas. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. And so let's see if we can put more than just band-aids, better solutions. And then the idea is that we heal up those cuts, and we have better protection mechanisms for the lake. And think about, the downwoody debris, especially if you've got a steep slope. All this stuff is a structure that helps to slow water down, helps to keep the soil there, and helps to add to the soil. So these are all things that really are important for a naturally functioning vegetative buffer along your shoreline. Nature's messy. And so, keep the areas that you need for yourself as, your manicured areas, but look at the areas that you can leave to nature to be messy and to function and provide that stability and resilience that it needs. And so really the key message is design with nature. Okay. Look at whatever you do as being low impact, low maintenance, low profile, and in the end is going to be low cost. And so by leaving as much of the shoreline there, what you're doing is you're putting that infrastructure to work and letting it do what it's supposed to do, and it regenerates and it helps protect that shoreline. Rocks, riprap doesn't regenerate, and over time it's going to move, and everything has to be maintained. So let nature do its course, and it's really going to help. So really, that's kind of my message about the ribbon of life. Let's see what we can leave for the lake and what we can protect and restore to make it better and more functioning. So I'm really very, very glad that putting this workshop together has generated a lot of interest. And we hope that you guys take a lot of good tools away from this and get you thinking about how you can sort of put in and do better things in your municipalities. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mike. So we're going to head into the next presentation by Victor Castro with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, looking at sort of the science of vegetative buffers. And I think, John, you're going to give an introduction first.
You betcha. Thank you. Victor Castro has worked with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks for over 28 years. He is currently the supervisor of the Water Resources section in Eastern Region, located in Kingston. Victor has a background in limnology and land use planning and has spent an entire career working to protect inland lakes. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, you're good. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And you can see the screen okay?
You'll just need to share your screen. That'll be the button on the bottom center of your screen. There we go. It's just loading up. Yep, we can see it now. Thank you, Victor.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. So we'll begin the shoreline buffer. So I'm going to begin. So what I'll talk about today is kind of, I'd like to talk about to distinguish between kind of what a buffer is and what a regulated setback is. And you've already seen Mike's initial drawing that shows the ribbon of life. And Mike's ribbon of life actually extends into the water, into the littoral zone, which is kind of a broader than what the buffer actually is. The buffer is actually kind of the land side of that vegetation protection. So I'll provide you with a definition. I'll also provide some photos of kind of what I've seen over the years as good and not so good types of shorelines. We'll go over the benefits of buffers, the size of buffers, what does the science really support in terms of the size of a buffer, and challenges moving forward. We're limited in time, so I don't think that we really have the time to get into all the data that kind of supports what the numbers show, but all that is there. We have very strong data on percent removal of total suspended solids, percent removal of nitrogens and phosphorus, and what these buffers actually do. So they do work. They do work, and I think intuitively we all know that they act as a filter. So we'll begin. So what is a buffer versus a setback? A buffer is a naturally vegetated portion of land between the high water mark and the developed portion of the waterfront lot. It's an area of limited removal of vegetation for water views and access paths. Non-disturbance of soils, no hardening of the surfaces. Whereas a setback is a regulated minimum horizontal distance from the high water mark to a structure. A buffer may be included inside the setback. And I think that most of us would kind of probably agree that we've done an okay job over the years implementing setbacks in the zoning bylaws and in kind of putting in setbacks for new development from structures, trying to push back redevelopment away from the shoreline where possible. Where I don't think we've done a good job, and when I say we, I mean everybody, the province included, is I don't think we've done a good job with kind of really putting teeth to and enforcing that buffer protection. We've talked about it for decades, but I think based on what I've seen out in the field over decades, what the surveys of shorelines have indicated is that there's a lot of disturbance of these shorelines. So best practices, I got some photos as well. So these kind of show some photos of some good practices out there where, the native vegetation has been maintained. And yes, there is a cottage back there. More pictures. And then the not so good types of landscapes that we've seen. And this is one property that John and I were at a couple of weeks ago, a lot that we supported the creation of a few years ago, and it's being developed now. And construction started just before last winter. One of the things that struck us right off the bat was that, there's absolutely no erosion and sediment control measures put in for this construction. The setback is there. There's definitely the setback. They located the dwelling where they were supposed to, but they removed all the understory and a lot of the vegetation, the trees, right down to the shoreline. So not really kind of what we wanted to see. I spoke to Mike yesterday in preparing our presentations, and Mike asked me a question about, with all these pictures showing some nasty shorelines, has the ministry ever kind of taken enforcement action against any of them? And and the answer to that is yes. We do have the regulatory tools, the municipalities, MNR, DFO, the feds. We all have regulatory tools to actually kind of go against the worst offenders and lay charges, require revegetation. But the problem with that is that it's reactive. The damage has already been done. So kind of, I think that what the intent of this workshop is to kind of put this at the planning proactive stage. That's kind of work to prevent these things from occurring as much as possible. So what does the science say about buffers? Qualitatively, you know, the research is very clear, and Mike's spoken to this already, but buffers provide a filters. They filter sediment and other pollutants, such as bacteria, heavy metals, pesticides, and they do a very good job of it. If you look at the literature, you can get up to 80+% removal of total suspended solids. So it's all the little particulate that comes off of landscape through stormwater runoff after it rains. These filters act to slow down the runoff. These filters act to infiltrate that water, and they act to remove those particulates. And you can get a lot of removal with a vegetative buffer, depending on what the buffer is. And there's lots of variability depending on types of plants, slopes, soil types. They also act, and this is a very important function, they also act to absorb nutrients from runoff and septics somewhat, but from stormwater runoff, definitely. The buffers will remove significant percentages, 50%, 60%, 70% of phosphorus, will also remove nitrogen, and will infiltrate that, and then the plants can use that to kind of take it out of the system. Buffers protect shorelines from erosion. They act as flood control. They provide a canopy and shade and temperature regulation. They provide habitat and food for wildlife, birds, deer. And on the economic side, so this is not just an environmental benefit, on the economic side of things, they also protect property values. They keep the assessment up. So what does the science say about the size of the buffer? How big does a buffer need to be functional without being ridiculous that, you know, you can't even see the lake, so where's that balance? Well, there's a large body of scientific literature on this topic. And in fairness, a lot of the literature is focused on buffers and vegetation along water courses and wetlands in highly agricultural and forestry type settings. A lot of it in the US setting, but there are papers that kind of do look at kind of on shield. There's less literature on the lakeshore development context, but the study findings overall, this whole body of literature on buffers, is still very relevant, even in the lakeshore setting, because what really we're looking at is how effective is a vegetative buffer. It doesn't matter what the disturbance is. The disturbance could be agricultural, could be urban, it could be forestry or lakeshore. The important part is how well does this vegetation work to remove these pollutants. So this is one table taken out of a paper. This is a metadata type study where the author looked at the findings from 48 other papers. So it's kind of a culmination, an aggregate of kind of many studies. And what the table demonstrates is that these are what 48 investigators, when they looked at different functions, and the functions being kind of removal of bacteria, nutrients, total suspended solids, sediment, temperature, and wildlife, and other functions. When they looked at these functions and they researched the data in their studies, what did they recommend in terms of a setback, in terms of a buffer width? And what the table shows is that, 50%, see if you can see my, the median of the buffer width for these different functions was always 30 plus 24 for nutrients. And this is just the median. When you look at this column over here, it shows that the percent of the research papers that recommended greater than 30 meters. So greater than, significant, over 50% of all the research papers that we see in the literature from these 48 studies recommended a setback, or sorry, I shouldn't say, I always get setbacks and buffers, recommended a buffer, a vegetative buffer of greater than 30 meters. And here's another study, Beacon. He's done a lot of work in this field, and these are risk-based guidelines, and risks vary depending on the size of the buffer. And what I'm interested in is kind of going down here into the low risk. So when you look at kind of your feature that you're trying to protect, such as water quality. So let's focus on water quality within a water course or a lake. So this is what we're kind of looking at. When we're looking at protecting water quality, to get down to a low risk of potential impact, what the author is saying is that you need to have a vegetated buffer of 30 plus meters. Once you start to get closer, smaller buffers, then you start to get into your moderate and high risk. And you can see that for lake environments and river environments, 30 seems to be kind of that margin, seems to be that threshold where you're starting to kind of low risk to moderate risk. So 30 seems to be kind of hitting that goal. However, what we also see is that when we're talking about the protection of, say, core habitat being perhaps species at risk, loon nesting, heron rookeries, any type of core habitat type of protection, those 30 meters are just not adequate. When you start getting into those types of specialized features, the literature is very clear that you need more significant buffers for those types of features. And the same thing goes to wetland environments. Wetland environments overall require slightly more or buffers to protect water quality and core habitat protection. So what is the general consensus of what the science says? Well, overall it says that 5-10 meters, not sufficient. 15 meters may be okay to maintain some physical removal of some pollutants, some chemical, but not the biological functions in the adjacent aquatic community, which is in that littoral zone down at the kind of the entrance into the lake. 30 meters overall is the minimum recommended to maintain all the three functions. And 30 meters is generally consistent with kind of what the province has recommended over the years through PPS, natural heritage, lake cap, and greater than 30 meters is definitely required for provincially significant wetlands, hazard lands, properties such, the properties that are being developed with significant slopes, very thin soils, limited vegetation. These types of hazard lands definitely require a greater buffer, a greater setback, in fact, for their structures. Core habitat zones, species at risk, these types of features warrant greater setbacks than just standard shoreline development. So we talked about a lot of the environmental benefits of shoreline vegetated buffers, but what about on the economic side? Here's a paper that was written in 2014 by some American researchers, and they used Ontario data. So what they did is they correlated water quality data, in fact, water clarity data. So how clear the lake was, how far down into the lake you can see. They used Lake Partner Program data, which is a program that my ministry coordinates, and they correlated that water clarity data with real estate values. And what they demonstrated statistically was that water clarity has a significant effect on lakefront property values. I don't think this is really a surprise to anybody, but these studies kind of, really bring it to light. The buyers are willing to pay more for cleaner lakes. So here's a direct economic incentive to protect shoreline buffers if we ever needed one. So what are our challenges moving forward? And I hope that kind of going through this will now segue into the remaining part of the workshop. So effective planning tools to manage and protect buffers. Enforcement. I think that we would all agree that, lack of enforcement to protect that buffer before it's removed, the tools have not really been there. Rehabilitation. A lot of the surveys that I've seen show that significant disturbance has already occurred to the shoreline buffer around many lakes. So how are we going to educate, and what are we going to do to kind of revegetate, bring that shoreline buffer back? Development on small undersized lots. So whether it's an existing, cottage on a small lot where someone now wants to redevelop that property and put something much larger and more modern and more extensive in terms of usage on that property, or whether it's an existing vacant undersized lot where someone wants to develop that lot for the first time, but it's very small, so they want to significantly put something that's very large on it, which is kind of out of character, and it's not going to be able to protect that buffer. So these are the kind of the challenges that I see moving forward, and I hope that kind of we hear today a lot of the tools and a lot of the approaches that the municipalities are considering to deal with this. So thank you very much.
I think that's those two presentations are a great introduction to this subject and some of the challenges that we're all realizing on our water bodies, and provides a great transition into now Darlene's presentation about sort of a suite of municipal tools that are available to help support vegetative buffers. And I believe, Terry, you'll be providing the formal introduction for Darlene.
Here I am, and thanks. Victor and Mike. That was great background and introduction. Darlene, pleased to introduce Darlene Coyle. She's got a strong background in freshwater policies, sustainable development, and multi-stakeholder decision-making. She's been actively volunteering with the Canadian Youth Biodiversity Network for the past 2 years as a policy project coordinator, and has been working with Watersheds Canada for the past year as the environmental policy and planning program lead. And I've been pleased to be part of the steering committee working on the Planning for Shorelines program that she's been leading. In this role, she's supporting local decision makers in their efforts to achieve sustainable waterfront development in a way that protects our lakes and rivers through education and program implementation initiatives. So over to you, Darlene.
Thank you, Terry. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Terry said, my name is Darlene, and I am currently leading the Planning for Our Shorelines project. So Planning for Our Shorelines is driven by a diverse steering committee of cottage associations like VOCA, conservation groups, conservation authorities, retired municipal staff, planners, and lake stewards. And the original thought behind this project was that existing municipal policies aimed at protecting the shoreland and lake were ineffective, and that decision makers needed help identifying what policy tools are available to them to address this. So based on our needs assessment of 200 municipal councillors, planners, and lake and river associations across Canada, we have been told that despite having significant environmental, economic, and social value, shoreline stewardship and official plans and zoning bylaws are generally inadequate to address development pressures. We were also told that provincial policy was adequately understood by local decision makers, but the science of buffers and the policy tools available to municipalities in protecting them were much less understood. So to help with this issue, the Planning for Our Shorelines program seeks to do two things. The first is by creating a website highlighting the science of natural shorelands, their social, economic, and environmental significance, and highlighting best management practices of innovative municipal policies regulating this issue. The second is by hosting a series of online discussion forums where local decision makers from across Ontario can come together and talk about some of their own experiences, openly discuss different mechanisms to sustainable waterfront development, and ultimately learn from each other. So far, we've surveyed over 50 municipalities across Ontario to find out what is currently being used to protect natural shorelands. So this presentation, I'm going to go over some of the policy tools that we've found so far that have shown some success and walk you through how they work. So before I jump in, I'm going to point out that this is not an exhaustive list of policy tools. These are just some of the ones that we have found so far in our research. So if you know of any that aren't mentioned today, I would love to hear about it. You can put them in the chat, or there will be a follow-up survey after this workshop, and that'll be an opportunity to share some of your thoughts there. Or I'm going to put my email in the chat later and we can have a chat. I would love that too. But it's important to talk to landowners before drafting any of these bylaws. It's important to be visible when doing education and outreach work, and that doesn't limit it to just formal town hall meetings, for example. It could be something informal, like setting up a booth at a farmer's market, for example. Because it's important to address any concerns or misconceptions that they might have about a policy impacting the way that they use their waterfront property, and connecting that tool with the ability to protect a public good, such as the water. So the province of Ontario provides a general response to the protection of our fresh water by encouraging the maintenance of vegetation and soft surfaces along lakes and rivers in the provincial policy statement. However, there isn't much enforcement or anything really required from the province in this area. And so it's up to municipalities to have strong policies and procedures in place to address buffers. So the province allows or enables municipalities to create bylaws that specifically address the unique circumstances and landscapes of their region. And so I'm going to focus on the relevant policy tools under the Planning Act and the Municipal Act today. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the planning principles that can be added to strengthen official plans and zoning bylaws, and then discuss these different supplementary bylaws that can be used to fill in any policy gaps. Official plans and zoning bylaws are also what all municipalities are required to have and what all other bylaws are supposed to be in line with. So this is kind of a good place to start. So when we're thinking about official plans and zoning bylaws, after hearing Victor and Mike talk about the importance of buffers, we should be thinking about whether these ideas and rationales are being adequately reflected in our policies to protect important natural capital like lakes and rivers. So I apologize for this dense text, but I really wanted to provide an example of what a strong rationale in an official plan looks like. So it's important to address minimum buffer sizes, building setbacks, lot coverage, and instances of redevelopment in the official plan as they relate to the waterfront. So as you can see in this example, the important role of vegetated shorelines is clearly emphasized, the minimum buffer is established, and the stance on new and redevelopment is outlined through the lens of protecting the shoreland. So this is also going to be reflected in the zoning bylaw in order to implement it into the decision-making process. So the first principle that I want to go over is the concept of an environmental net gain, which is an approach used to ensure that development of any kind leaves the natural environment in a measurably improved state compared to prior conditions. So this is something that very few municipalities currently have in their existing policies. It's more common for a municipality to require the development applicant to demonstrate that no negative impacts or no adverse effects will result from the proposed development, often in the form of an environmental impact study or some other technical assessment. The problem with this approach is that it doesn't account for cumulative effects, as you get several people surrounding a lake undergoing bigger and more intense development, clearing more and more vegetation, hardening more and more surface area. And if you're only looking at it from the perspective of negative impacts as a result of one property at a time, you're not going to get the full picture. So instead, environmental net gain emphasizes how the natural environment is going to be improved as a result of the development plan. So environmental net gain is identifying steps a landowner can take as a condition for further development. It's about identifying ways to improve the existing situation and reduce the environmental impact of development to protect the water and find a balance between human enjoyment and restoring the natural environment. And this can be done in several ways. It can be as simple as restoring vegetation along the shorelines, but it can also be increasing vegetation elsewhere on the property, most notably along the side lot lines, in front of hardened surfaces like the main dwelling and patios, or it could be bordering pathways as well. It could be using stormwater management methods, diverting stormwater to a rain garden, a rain barrel, or whatever it may be. It could be increasing upgrading the sewage disposal system and increasing that setback. And it could be limiting the number of access points to the water and making a winding path. Or it could be a no-mow zone. So if an area has been proven to have a low survival rate, a no-mow zone is a very simple way to allow the area to regenerate on its own. So the next principle is that of the shoreline activity area, which attempts to concentrate shoreland disturbances to a confined area while keeping the majority of the shoreland vegetated and natural. So generally, Environment Canada recommends at least 75% of the shorelines should remain in or be restored to their natural state. And this can be used to help achieve that. So if 75% is left natural, a maximum of 25% would be used for active use. And the point is not to harden the entire shoreline activity area. Rather, it's just where disturbances would go. So this is where your dock and other shoreline accessory structures would go. This is where the recreational space to the water would be in order to maintain the rest of the shoreline natural. So this image isn't the best representation because ideally there would be a winding path to the water instead of this straight runway look. And the shoreline activity area would only be a few meters deep as opposed to going all the way to the building setback as shown here. You can still have your view to the water. You can just cut out branches and create kind of like a window through the vegetation, but there's really no need to make a clearing like this going all the way upland. So the way that shoreline activity areas are regulated are through the zoning bylaw. And this will include the maximum size, which includes frontage and depth. So many municipalities will dictate either a certain number of meters that this can be. Some will dictate a certain percentage of the shoreline, and others will do the lesser of the two. It should also be mentioned how densely these areas can be developed. And this can be by the square footage of the area. So for example, Lake of Bays says that 40% of the square footage of the shoreline activity area can be developed, while others will just include it in the total lot coverage percentage. And of course, outlining what uses this area can and cannot be used for. So are there docks that are going to be encouraged more? Are there boathouses permitted? All that kind of stuff should be included here. So we're going to move on to our first policy tool, and probably the most common of the four, site plan control. And this is addressed under Section 41 of the Planning Act. So this can be used by a lower tier municipality to review development applications, require specific alterations to the plan, and enter into a binding agreement between the development applicant and the municipality in order to ensure that best planning principles are followed. So although site plan control is often focused on main development aspects such as height and density and all that stuff, as outlined in the zoning bylaw, the Planning Act allows a municipality to establish the requirement, or allows the municipality to require vegetation in the form of landscaping to protect adjoining lands as a condition for site plan approval. So landscaping isn't really the ideal term that we want to be using here, but we can still use this to require increased vegetation on a property in the face of proposed development. There's also this common perception that site plan control is mainly used for large industrial or commercial developments, but it can also be used for smaller residential development as well, as long as it's outlined in the official plan and site plan control bylaw. So first, the official plan and site plan control bylaw need to designate the site plan control area. And this can include the entire municipality, or it can be focused on certain areas like the waterfront. Then it'll designate the types of development that site plan control is subject to. And this can include both new development and redevelopment. So when a waterfront property owner wants to build an addition onto their dwelling, for example, if the waterfront is included in the site plan control area, this would be triggered. So a landowner would be encouraged to consult with their municipal planner to find out what the appropriate technical studies would be in order to inform the municipality's decision. This would be included with the site plan drawing, like the one shown here, to show where the existing and proposed development is, as well as some of the existing vegetation. What's missing in this drawing is the proposed plantings. And that's because the drawing from this municipality it's not required in their site plan control bylaw. But if it did, which is ideal, that would be shown in this drawing. So as you can see, the dark areas are to be removed and the proposed dwelling is being moved back away from the water and outside the flood zone. So municipal staff would then review this plan, request any alterations to make it consistent with the official plan and zoning bylaw standards. And this is where the reestablishment of a vegetated shoreline buffer or any other environmental net gains could be inserted as a condition for development. It should be noted that the site plan control bylaw does not have the authority to impose new standards limiting development. Instead, it's a tool to review proposals and determine conformity with the official plan and zoning bylaw. So it's important to mention landscaping requirements in these policies because if they're not mentioned as a potential condition, it's going to be difficult to impose them later on in a site plan agreement with a landowner. Site plan agreements can also be registered on title to ensure that the vegetative buffer continues to be maintained despite any change in ownership of the land. So the next three bylaws I'm going to talk about are used under different sections of the Municipal Act. They use the same regulatory framework with just different purposes in mind. So the first bylaw is that of a tree bylaw. And this has been called several other names. There's been tree cutting bylaw, tree preservation bylaw, forest conservation bylaw. They're all different names for regulating the maintenance of existing tree cover and trying to prevent clear cutting. So while site plan control can be used to require plantings, this bylaw can help ensure existing vegetation stays there. So the way these bylaws work is that the destruction or injury of trees is prohibited within a certain area unless a permit has first been obtained. So some municipalities will apply this to the entire lands within the municipality. Others will apply it to certain areas like the waterfront. So exceptions can be made to this, such as if a tree removal has already been approved under site plan control or plan of subdivision, the trees are small and within a certain diameter, or the trees are diseased or hazardous and have been confirmed so by a certified arborist. The municipality can also attach conditions to a permit to ensure the intent of the bylaw is maintained. And this can include a vegetation management plan, a tree preservation plan, the replacement of tree plantings either on the property or somewhere else within the municipality in order to maintain the existing tree cover. However, it should be noted that several rural municipalities have reported pushback from some industries, such as agriculture, forestry, developers, and landscapers in relation to these bylaws. So it's important to incorporate a lot of engagement and education work when drafting these bylaws. So if the intent is to use these bylaws to maintain a vegetated shoreline buffer, Muskoka Lakes is an interesting example. So the Township of Muskoka Lakes has applied this bylaw to protected areas and lands within 60 meters of the waterfront. So under this bylaw, all destruction or injury of trees within 15 meters of the high water mark is prohibited in order to maintain the vegetative buffer within the official plan. Any work being done between the 15 to 60 meter mark requires a permit. As an upper tier example, the County of Haliburton has recently passed a shoreline tree preservation bylaw, which we're fortunate to have someone from the county actually speak to this. So I'm going to leave it at that. The next bylaw is that of a site alteration bylaw. which is also referred to as a fill bylaw. And this is found under section 142 of the Municipal Act. These, like tree bylaws, are generally underutilized in rural municipalities, but have very similar regulatory frameworks like tree bylaws. So the purpose of these is to prevent anyone from placing or dumping fill, removing topsoil, or altering the grade or topography of the land without first obtaining a permit. The purpose of this is to maintain the natural landform and drainage of the site. So this bylaw, like a tree bylaw, can be passed by either an upper, lower, or single tier municipality. Again, like tree bylaws, a site alteration bylaw typically applies to all lands within the municipality, but it can also be used for certain areas as well. So for example, Muskoka Lakes, Gravenhurst, and Severn have included specific provisions into the waterfront in order to maintain vegetated shoreline buffers. So in these cases, a person would need to obtain a permit before they alter any area within the waterfront. It should be noted that it's important to be thorough when drafting these bylaws because the Municipal Act only allows these bylaws to regulate through permits and conditions. So if it's not listed as a potential condition to a permit, it's going to be difficult to impose it later on. The Planning Act also excludes agricultural practices from these bylaws, as well as minor landscaping. So these aren't really applicable to these bylaws. However, limits can be placed on the amount of fill being brought in for these activities. So when a landowner wants to undergo development involving the change in the grade or bringing in fill, they would be required to fill out an application, giving out all the details of the project, which gives the municipality an opportunity to review and apply any conditions to the work being done. Conditions can include setting aside the topsoil to be used to restore the original surface cover after the filling has been done. It can be protecting designated trees, limiting slopes on the property, requiring an erosion or sedimentation control plan, and restricting truck volumes and access routes. The last bylaw I'm going to talk about is a shoreline bylaw. And we actually have a few speakers to talk about their experiences drafting these and using them. So I'm not going to talk too much about them. But generally, shoreline bylaws seem to be a combination of several sections of the Municipal Act, including tree and site alteration bylaws. They're just specific to the waterfront. So similar to how Muskoka Lakes has both a tree bylaw and a site alteration bylaw specific to the waterfront, this would just be combining it into one. So monitoring and enforcement is probably the biggest challenge of any policy implementation. Most municipalities are quite reactionary, like Victor was saying, meaning that although there might be a designated bylaw officer, it's very difficult to monitor all lands within the municipality adequately. And so many offenses are either not reported, or if they are reported, they're called in by a complaining neighbor. So it's important to educate not only your staff on the importance of vegetative buffers, but also landowners, so they can take steps to actively restore their property because they understand the benefits of doing so. So some enforcement mechanisms include the collection of a security deposit along with the permit application and are returned upon the completion of the project where it's been proven that the plan has actually been followed, or the deposit can be used to remedy any damages that resulted from the project. Some will ask the landowner to submit updated reports throughout the project in order to get any understanding of how the project's going. It can also require, the municipality can require pictures of their plantings, and some municipalities, more so in urban areas, have started using drones, obviously letting the landowner know to expect this so they don't get shot down. But generally, this is a difficulty that many municipalities are struggling with. So as we've seen so far, there's no perfect solution to maintaining and restoring a vegetated shoreline buffer with the existing legislative framework. However, by strengthening existing policies like official plans and zoning bylaws, and including specific waterfront policies to review development proposals, such as the ones I've talked about today, it can help ensure that the township landowner, and any contractors are aware of the necessary safeguards to protect the water during development. So the Planning for Our Shorelines team really wanted to create resources to help municipalities implement these types of policies. So we've created some educational resources. Most of these are in draft form and will be finalized in the next couple months, but we're going to make some of these available to you guys in order to get feedback and improve any areas that need it. So the first is the Science of Buffers resources, which can be altered to serve multiple purposes. The first is boiling it down to a one-pager to give to landowners to understand all the holistic benefits of natural shorelands. Another is geared towards planners to provide quick rationales for requiring a buffer as a condition for approval or to be used during any appeal processes. And another is an annotated bibliography for anyone who's looking for the scientific literature. The next is the environmental net gains decision tree, and this is also geared towards planners. It provides a scenario of a redevelopment proposal that requires planning approval and walks the reader through the types of questions necessary to achieve an environmental net gain. So remember, this doesn't just focus on vegetation. There are other aspects that can be done to improve the environmental impact of waterfront lots. And so this document highlights that. Next is the planting plan template. And this has actually been requested from us, and we are almost ready to publish it. We've heard a lot about how municipalities can improve regulations, but this resource allows and involves landowners in the restoration and improvement process. So it's a step-by-step document walking a property owner through how to complete a buffer planting plan. And this is intended to be used by municipalities across Ontario, and it's attached to our native plant database to make it as simple as possible. However, property owners should still be encouraged to contact an organization with a planting program, which is listed in the document itself. Lastly, there is an in-depth analysis of policy tools available, which includes the ones that I've spoken about today. And this will be made available in the next coming months as well. So with that being said, the planting plan template and the decision tree will be sent to you in a follow-up package after this workshop, along with my slide deck, which includes hyperlinks to the bylaws that I've spoken about today. And if you're interested in getting final drafts of these materials, you can sign up for our newsletter by going to our website, or you can email me directly and I can handle that for you. So I think it's worth mentioning that restoring and maintaining a vegetative shoreline buffer is not about taking land away from people. It's not a land grab. It's about protecting our land from literally being washed away. It's about maintaining that connection with the natural environment, which is why most people are drawn to the waterfront in the first place. It's about taking action to increase the resiliency of waterfront properties in the face of climate change, so that future generations are given the same opportunity that we've had to enjoy the natural environment. And it's for these reasons that we need strong, informed, and enforceable policies to regulate decision-making at the waterfront to ensure sustainable development occurs moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Darlene. That was a fantastic overview of municipal tools available. That was an excellent program and excellent presentation, and a great number of tools and resources that people will be able to access and have a look at and see if it might be something that they'll be able to implement along their waterway. So that brings us to 10:25. So we're just a few minutes behind schedule. That's not a problem. So this is the time in our agenda for a little 5-minute health break. I'll ask that everyone comes back at 10:30 so we can get underway with our next round of presentations. And so the next sort of 1/3 of our seminar is going to include 3 presentations from 3 different municipalities that are going to be speaking to the policy and planning tools that they're using within their local area to help protect the waterfront. So we've got presentations from the Township of Rideau Lakes, the Township of South Frontenac, and Haliburton counties. We'll have those when we come back after the break. And during the break, we have a question for you. And I see there's lots of great questions and comments already coming in this morning. But we're going to put up a question in the chat function. And our question is about asking all of you what your biggest concerns are or interests are when it comes to waterfront development and the protection of our freshwater ecosystems. So feel free during the break to pop your answer, your comments into the chat function, and we will reconnect and get going again at 10:30. Thanks, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So that last presentation from Darlene is a great foundation, you could say, for our next 3 presentations. Darlene spoke about tools that are already available within the municipal planning process or policy process through the Municipal Planning Act and the Municipal Act and the Planning Act. And we're going to now hear from 3 different municipalities how they are actually using those acts to protect their waterfront, either the bylaws through the Municipal Act or planning processes through the Planning Act. The great examples of how they're being implemented on the ground today. So we're going to start off with a presentation. It's a joint presentation by John McDowell of the Upper Rideau Lake Association and Brittany Mulhern, the Director of Planning. And they're speaking about the use of shoreline buffer planting programs within the Township of Rideau Lakes. And I believe, Mike, you'll be doing the introduction for both John and Brittany.
Sorry, Susan. Yeah, I'll do the introduction for John and Megan.
Right, and Megan.
Yeah, for
great. Okay.
Brittany. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce John McDowell, who has been a seasonal resident on the Upper Rideau Lake for 20 summers and an enthusiastic visitor to the area before that. He has volunteered on the board of the Lake Association for 5 years. And John McDowell has worked for many years as an executive in the federal government, including working with municipal and provincial governments on infrastructure projects. So actually, John is the president of the Upper Rideau Lake Association.
And following John will be Brittany Mulhern, and Brittany is a registered professional planner who has been with the Township of Rideau Lakes for over 10 years, with the last 8 years in the position of Manager of Development Services. And growing up in a rural community with additional background working in other rural and waterfront municipalities such as Prince Edward County, Leeds, and the Thousand Islands and Addington Highlands, Brittany has a keen interest in rural waterfront planning. So Brittany will be following up, talking about planting plan requirements for shorelines and redevelopment applications in Rideau Lakes Townships from a municipal perspective.
Hello, Susan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, John. Feel free to get started when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. Brittany, can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'd like to congratulate the organizers because this truly is a natural segue into a tangible measure that municipalities can adopt. And I would just like to say personally, it is something that I believe has and will continue to make a real difference for the health of our lake, not only now, but well into the future. So For people who are not familiar with the Upper Rideau Lake, we are on the canal corridor, the Rideau Canal corridor, about halfway between Ottawa and Kingston. The Upper Rideau Lake is the high point of the Rideau system, so water flows south to Kingston and north to Ottawa from our lake. It's a medium-sized lake for Eastern Ontario. We have some 350 properties, which is increasing fast, 2 active campgrounds, 2 municipalities bound our lake. The Township of Rideau Lakes has the majority of the shoreline, and we have Westport, the village of Westport, on a small part of our lake. So I think, like just about every lake in Ontario, we are experiencing significant development pressures. These comprise cottage conversions to full-time residences. We've got campground densification, and just generally, our whole area is responding to housing demand, the need for more and more housing. So it's a very, very busy part of the province. Our lake association represents about 1/3 of the properties on the lake. There's some undocumented development on our lake, but in general, this is not the norm. Slide, please. So our water quality is poor, and I would just note Victor Castro implied that if you got clear water, your water quality is good, or at least that's what I understood. Well, our water quality is poor. It's officially poor, even though it looks fantastic. And that in and of itself is a challenge for our lake association. But we've had high levels of phosphorus on our lake for decades, and really it's due to the legacy impact of the canal construction itself about 180 some odd years ago, and legacy human presence, including septic, private septic, village septic, and also stormwater runoff. We have poor water quality, and we're a fragile lake. And for us, as it is, I think for everyone, climate change is real. We are experiencing longer, hotter summers. Last year, our lake had 2 confirmed blue-green algae blooms. Fortunately, these were transitory, but they are symptomatic of a lake that is under stress. Slide, please. Site plan conditions. I think the previous presenter covered this, but just a quick review. The way we understand it is waterfront development is effectively permanent. It never goes away. So the development itself is permanent. And development, particularly within the 30 meters from the water in our township, is subject to approval by council on recommendation from the planning committee. So such development is usually approved with specific accompanying conditions to support the lake, such as shoreline plantings. And these environmental conditions are accepted by the property owner as part of the package. So, slide, please. So what are the challenges for the lake if site plan conditions are not registered on title? Well, first of all, if the property changes hands, the new owner may not know or even care about conditions attached to developments preceding their ownership. Development, which is permanent, stays, but the conditions attached to it are at risk of becoming transitory. In effect, the original land use decisions by council are at risk of not being respected as properties change hands. Plus, sometimes municipalities can be stretched to follow up on environmental conditions, especially conditions which are outside the building code per se. Lake associations and our conservation authority, the RBCA, encourage robust shoreline plantings. It's not simply good enough to keep what you had if what you had is simply a lawn to the water. And some of these activities are well known. Look what we're doing here today. We also, along with RBCA, we have voluntary programs, some voluntary programs to assist shoreline plantings with trees and indigenous shrubs. But these, frankly, do not have significant uptakes. And in particular, they don't have uptakes among the properties that one would wish, where there were more shoreline plantings. Slide, please. So this slide here really speaks to the advocacy movement within our township. So as in all communities, I think there are a number of people who really care about the health of their community and have been there for a long time. And on our lake, there were several long-term committed residents who noticed over time that shoreline protections on specific properties were not being protected. They were lost as ownership changed. These people really are the corporate memory of our lake. And we, as a lake association, we noticed this too. And some local councillors who had been present for a very, very long time, who knew the properties and who had insisted on mitigation measures as a condition of the original development, were concerned as well. I should say absolutely that the township of Rideau Lakes, as one might expect, has a lot of lakes and a lot of lake associations. And so this advocacy movement to support registration of site plan conditions on title was undertaken by many individuals and about 5 or 6 very committed lake associations, only one of which was our own. Slide, please. So the council decision. So first of all, this was a real debate at council. It was not a gimme, at least looking at it from the outside. I was never certain that it was going to pass until it did pass. There were a number of points raised by councillors at committee when the decision was taken. One was who would pay for the registration itself, and the decision was that it would be paid by the property owner. There was a bit of a debate about the scope, the exact scope of additions like decks, etc., like small decks. And there was concerns expressed about the cost of enforcement. But at the end of the day, there was a majority support for registering site plan conditions on title. And now inspection of site plan conditions has become a program. So this has become institutionalized, more rigorous, and de facto a program of enforcement. I should also say that we worked with the council of Rideau Lakes to entrench the site plan registration on title within the new official plan. And we are very, very pleased that it is in fact in the new official plan, and this means it will be protected into the future. So thank you. I can take questions, but it's over to you, Brittany.
Thank you, John. Susan, I believe we're taking questions afterwards. Is that correct?
Yeah, after we have the 3 municipal presentations, and we're going to enter into a Q&A panel discussion with the speakers.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Today I've been asked to speak to you about the site plan control program at our township. And specifically, it's called our follow-up and support program and shoreline buffer planting guide components of the site plan control process. And as previously introduced, I'm Brittany Mulhern. I'm the manager of development services with the Township of Rideau Lakes. The Township of Rideau Lakes is entirely subject to site plan control under Section 41 of the Ontario Planning Act. And specifically, all properties within 100 meters of the water and over 30 square meters in size are included in site plan control. And through site plan control conditions in site plan agreements, for instance, the township implements good waterfront management practices with property owners. John covered most of the context of the program in that in 2019, various lake associations approached our township with concerns over our site plan control process, specifically as it related to enforcement of established agreements and lack of vegetated shoreline buffers on waterfront properties. Council took the concerns very seriously and directed staff to further research their concerns and ultimately to provide options and consult with the conservation authorities to see what options might be out there to address the concerns of the lake associations. And as a result of this review, Council revised our site plan control bylaw and implemented a new policy, again entitled the Site Plan Control Follow-Up and Support Program and Vegetated Shoreline Buffer Policy. The follow-up and support program refers to the township's annual program to audit the compliance of a previous year's waterfront site plans, where a site plan control agreement has been entered into with the municipality. The goal of the program is ultimately to provide education and resources to property owners about the importance of shoreline vegetation and to seek environmental net gains to shoreline properties, as well as ensuring compliance with a legal agreement with the township. The program follows a 4-year cycle in hopes that all development in the agreement will already be completed and all vegetative requirements met within that time frame. For instance, if we were to do the previous year, they might not have completed their development yet or their shoreline buffers. So that's why we do a 4-year cycle. In order to determine compliance, staff developed a review form that is filled out during review of each relevant site plan agreement, either on site or through a desktop exercise of each relevant agreement provided by the property owner. The review is broken up into 4 categories: site details, structural, functional, and environmental, as you can see here on the screen. In the functional and environmental categories, we look at water access points, landscaping, vegetation, and go into detail on what kind of vegetation exists on the property, and specifically, of course, whether or not there is a shoreline buffer. In 2020, we undertook a review of 2016 site plan control agreements, and where we reviewed 36 site plan agreements. Which was one of the bigger aspects of the program. And what we found was that all properties either maintained or improved their shoreline's vegetated state from 2016. Even more encouraging, 76% improved their shorelines by allowing them to naturalize. And 68% were deemed to have a fully naturalized shoreline, which represented an ideal shoreline condition. In 2021, Council fully implemented the follow-up and support program, and we reviewed 2017 site plan agreements, which included 46 properties. Again, we found encouraging results in that all properties had either maintained or improved their shorelines. 76% were considered to have naturalized shorelines, 6.5 have started to naturalize, 11 have maintained their shoreline likely through grass, but have not naturalized, and 6.5 have a small naturalized area at the shoreline. You may be wondering how we determine our naturalization categories, and as such, I've included those in the next few slides with some pictures to help illustrate. Ultimately, we compare the shorelines from the original agreement stage through the site plan agreement in the agreement itself, as well as pictures that were taken by staff through the agreement stage to follow up at the review stage. For instance, in 2021, we reviewed 2017 site plans and 2017 pictures with what we found on site in 2021, either through a site visit or by pictures supplied by the applicant. And we have 5 naturalization categories. Property A, as you'll see here on the screen, is where a shoreline buffer has been encouraged and maintained, and where staff do really not have any concerns. Through the pictures, you will note there hasn't been a lot of change at the shoreline, which has already been decently naturalized compared to 2017. So there weren't any major issues on this site. Property B is where a naturalized shoreline has not yet been implemented and where staff encourage greater plantings and naturalization. In the example, you will see the shoreline has been hardened and not naturalized, so certainly not an ideal situation. Property C is where there has been what we consider an unnatural shoreline, where the owners are beginning to implement plantings, such as pods, which are little saplings of new plantings, which will help to naturalize the shoreline over time. Admittedly, this picture is not the best example we had. However, this is a site identified by staff where the owners have started initial plantings to implement the shoreline buffer. So these little, looks like wood slabs here, these are where the plantings actually are. So you see there are a fair amount of them, and they're starting to come up. I would hope being a year later now, they already look better, I would hope. Property D is where a small shoreline buffer area has been planted and where the shoreline is not considered to be naturalized overall. We typically encourage the owners to expand the area, but I admit are less concerned compared to other categories. As you can see here, there's still pretty ample vegetation right at the shoreline, though we do have more grass than we'd like to see. And property E is a property of concern, as you can likely anticipate. The shoreline has not been naturalized, and no attempt, it appears, has been made to make it naturalized. And we strongly encourage plantings and a shoreline buffer in these circumstances. And going to the next slide. You may be wondering why I've been using the word encourage instead of requiring applicants to implement the vegetative buffer. Prior to late 2019, the township had conditions in our site plan control agreement that encouraged shoreline naturalization but did not require it. In late 2019, however, the shoreline buffer planting guide was implemented and became a standard condition in our site plan agreements. So starting in 2024, based on our 4-year cycle, we are hoping to see even greater shoreline naturalization improvements as a result of this guide, because the wording is a bit more strict in terms of the conditions, because each applicant is required to submit a shoreline planting plan as part of a complete application. The shoreline buffer planting guide refers to the township developed handbook that was created in coordination with the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority, the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, and Watersheds Canada. And it's to assist property owners with developing a vegetative shoreline buffer. I would like to give particular credit to the RVCA, as a lot of the information in the guide came from their existing documents and their help creating it. A vegetated shoreline buffer is the area along land directly adjacent to a water body of a property that is rich in native plants, trees, and shrubs. It is not landscaped or highly manicured. Areas between plants are allowed to grow up with native grasses and wildflowers, and natural succession is allowed. Typically, it's a no-mow area with little to no maintenance. So certainly a lot of what you've already heard this morning. The guide is available on our website and also given to every participant in the program, as well as all applicants who apply for site plan control. This slide shows a snapshot of an example shoreline planting plan. Oops, not too far. Planting plan provided in our guide. On the left, you will see a site plan drawing with a legend which illustrates the planting plan. And on the right is the detailed plan of how this would be achieved and maintained. You will note that while we request a fair amount of detail, the plan itself is relatively easy to create and hopefully implement by property owners. There's no requirement for a professional to create the plan unless that is desired by the applicant. This slide and the following are snapshots from our guide as well that are given to applicants. We've attempted to make this guide as user-friendly as possible, with details as to what we're looking for, what the benefits of the naturalized shoreline is, as well as some tips as to what species to plant. Further, we include contacts to relevant agencies to help create a plan if the landowner does not want to do the plan themselves, or they would like further assistance. In the RVCA's watershed, we find that many applicants take advantage of their shoreline naturalization program. And as the CRCA does not have a similar program, we usually direct applicants to Watersheds Canada in their Natural Edge program. And ultimately, I can't say enough good things about those two programs and the providers, of course. In terms of applicants working well with them, we only typically hear positive feedback from the applicants. So I typically encourage applicants to reach out to those organizations to assist with their planting plans. The guide also details our requirements related to the area that should be naturalized, shoreline access path widths, and recommended planting density, spacing between plants, when plants should be planted, etc. timing and cost, always an important feature of any program. You may be wondering what those logistics are in terms of the noted programs. In 2020 and 2021, in the initial years of the program, the township hired a summer contract individual to complete the program with oversight by the manager, meaning myself. In these initial years of the program, we completed a detailed spreadsheet to track the amount of time that was spent administering the program. The staff time ranged from about 70 hours to 120 hours for the contract employee, in addition to about 10 to 12 by the manager. Follow-up time for our chief building official, usually related to finding additional structures on site without permits, started at around 4 hours. And ultimately, ideally, the program would begin in May and would be completed by the end of September. In the last couple of years, we've got a bit of a late start, and we started in June. And again, though, we hope to be done by the end of September. The program ends with a final report to our Planning Advisory Committee, which then reports to Council in terms of what happened with the program. So a lot of the stats you have saw here today or the past, we grabbed from our last year's report, for instance. Overall, I would suggest staff have received relatively positive feedback on this program and guide, and found that applicants are overall appreciative of the goals of the program. What we hope to see at the Township of Rideau Lakes is greater improvement of our shorelines while balancing the needs of development. And I would be happy to answer any questions once we get to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John and Brittany, for a great presentation on the work that's gone on from sort of a grassroots perspective with the lake associations, and that great relationship with the township and council to implement a bylaw to protect the waterfront. That's really great example, and hopefully that gives some perhaps hope and parameters for those of you participating in this workshop today that might be a useful type of program for your local municipality. So we'll head into our second presentation. This presentation is from Claire Dodds, the Director of Development Services for the Township of South Frontenac, and she'll be speaking to us about a shoreline vegetation retention bylaw that the municipality has been working on. And I believe, John, you'll be giving us an introduction to Claire.
That's correct. Thank you very much. And I have the lovely pleasure of introducing Claire Dodds. I live in South Frontenac, and she is the Director and Development Services, a director with the Township of South Frontenac. Claire leads the delivery of planning, building, and economic development services in South Frontenac. Claire is a registered professional planner with a master's in rural planning and development from the University of Guelph. Claire spent 15 years working as a planner and senior planner with the County of Huron, delivering local and county planning services. Since moving to Eastern Ontario in 2016, Claire worked as the team lead with the Eastern Ontario Regional Office of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, before moving into the position of Director of Development Services with South Frontenac in 2018. Take it away, Claire.
Thank you so much, John, and thanks to everybody for your participation today. It's nice to see some familiar faces and names as we talk about this really important topic, which is so vital to so many of our communities right across Ontario. And I've been seeing some other participants from other parts of the country as well. So really lovely to be able to share what we're doing in South Frontenac, and potentially certainly learn from other folks here today as well. I was asked, and Michael had reached out just to share some information around a project that we are working on in South Frontenac in terms of looking at the creation of a shoreline protection bylaw for our township specifically. We have over 75 named inland lakes in South Frontenac, and so watershed protection, watershed planning is certainly a very important part of our day-to-day activities in our township. Just have a very brief agenda here, just in terms of some of the topics I'm going to cover in this presentation. And I am conscious that we are, a little over time. So where there's been some duplication from other presenters, I'll move through the material fairly quickly in the hopes of getting us a little closer to being back on schedule. So certainly, if there's anything that folks would like some further information about, I'm certainly happy to answer that as part of the questions for the presenters. One of the things that we have noticed, and I probably should put a disclaimer in this presentation, that there are some alarming photos in terms of some of the what I would call some more recent and extreme events around shoreline clearing that we have seen in the township. And one of the things that we have noticed, certainly over the last couple of years, is the intensity of development that's happening along our waterfront. Certainly through COVID, trends that were already underway here in the township in terms of in-migration and changing hands of properties. We've certainly seen a lot of new residents to our township and certainly seeking waterfront properties. And through that time frame, especially early on in the pandemic, we have seen some fairly extreme forms of shoreline cutting. I've got probably the most extreme photos in the presentation, but we certainly know that in addition to these examples, we have a lot of shoreline protection that I think Michael had shared the comment earlier. It's vegetation is being lost kind of on an intermittent basis with 1,000 cuts, so to speak. And so we know that not every instance is quite as extreme as this and some others that you will see, but I think some of the extreme events have caught the public attention, have caught our lake association's attention, and certainly our council's attention, as well as staff. In March of 2020, certainly with some of the more extreme events that we were seeing in terms of vegetation removal along some waterfront properties on some of our more populated lakes, council did ask through a notice of motion to have staff prepare a report on a series of alternatives to protecting lake shorelines in our township. And in response, certainly staff have been undertaking this work, and I'll outline some of that today. These are just some other examples of shoreline cutting that we were seeing happening around this same time frame, kind of early spring 2020. This is on Lowborough Lake, which is certainly one of our heavily populated and very popular lakes. And this was work that somebody was doing in preparation of putting a shoreline ramp and having docks that were being revised and part of their property. This was a tree cutting incident that happened on Sydenham Lake, actually not far from our municipal office here. And what we were finding was a lot of the vegetation removal was happening in the winter, where it was easier to get access. And a lot of the stumps and trees that you see in this photo were also removed following the taking of this picture. And so with these particular instances, council through their notice of motion, we're under a perception that we had some pretty strong regulations that existed in the township already, and wanted staff to look into those, as well as to research if there was other ways to strengthen the protection that we apply to the shoreline. South Frontenac has had a long history with our official plan that came into effect in 2003 of having what I would say is fairly strong policies, and certainly being a leader of that time in terms of the implementation, both in our official plan and our zoning bylaw, of the 30-meter setback. And oftentimes planning is looked to in order, and tools under the Planning Act are looked to in order to address every circumstance of development and shoreline protection. And I think we heard from Darlene's presentation earlier on that there are actually other tools that, at least in my opinion, are sometimes more effective. And so the research that staff were doing in South Frontenac through through 2020 and 2021, we're looking at some of those tools, what we had existing in place, and what other tools we could add to our suite in order to protect shorelines more broadly. So our official plan encourages landowners to protect environmentally sensitive areas. We have vegetation protections. Our official plan talks about the protection of vegetation within 30-meter setback, and also that the soil mantle within 30 meters should not be altered. So there should not be significant site alteration. What most folks don't necessarily appreciate is that an official plan is a guideline document to which other planning tools have to conform, but it is not a enforcement document in the sense that you need other types of planning approvals or other types of regulations that flow out of an official plan in order to give it effect. A zoning bylaw certainly talks about our 30-meter buffer and that there should be natural vegetative buffers within the 30 meters of the high water mark. But zoning bylaws have some limitations in terms of being the preferred tool in terms of regulating vegetation. Our zoning bylaw had language that said that vegetative buffers should be maintained. And so when we consulted with legal in terms of these particular instances, there from a legal enforcement perspective, we have to enforce the zoning bylaw by taking essentially property owners to court. And there was not a feeling that there was strong enough legislation or clear enough authority in the zoning bylaw that we were able to successfully win in terms of having charges laid through the courts in these particular instances. So it was on that basis we started to look to other tools as well. One thing that we do have a long-standing history, and you heard from Rideau Lakes how they are looking at applying site plan control and conditions of development in terms of implementing shoreline protections. Similarly, in South Frontenac, we have a long-standing history through plans of subdivision, condominiums, site plans, and in particular development agreements, registering those on title and ensuring that there are provisions in those agreements that maintain the vegetation, prohibit tree cutting, certainly within that 30 meters of the high water mark. And those documents in those instances do become far more legally enforceable when there is violation. Similar to other municipalities, we never have enough enforcement staff to be everywhere to necessarily catch those types of tree cutting in progress, but we do have, through those agreements registered on title, some legal means to go back to deal with the enforcement of those in those extreme instances. The unfortunate part is the instances that were happening in 2020 in particular, and the photos that you saw were not properties that had been subject to planning approvals. And so they didn't have any agreements that were registered on title that the township could legally enforce. Obviously, we work closely with our Conservation Authority partners. And so in those instances, we certainly consult with our Conservation Authority staff, our enforcement staff and regulation staff to see if there are any violations that have occurred under the Conservation Authority regulation. We know that certainly in our jurisdiction, we have 3 conservation authorities, RVCA, Cataraqui Conservation, and Quinte Conservation. And while they are important partners in terms of our review of planning applications on their own, the conservation authorities really don't regulate tree cutting within the 30-meter buffer area of our lakes. Certainly, the conservation authorities have their regulations and their legislation, but really when it comes to regulating tree cutting and vegetation removal, that tends to fall more into the municipal domain and relies on municipal bylaws to do that. So the challenge essentially as defined is that there was no comprehensive tool in effect in South Frontenac, certainly in 2020, in order to address maintaining natural vegetative buffers and controlling tree removal on properties that were not already subject to a planning application. And so what we found was that we had kind of this dotted landscape around our lakes of one property that may be subject to a site plan, a development agreement, or a planned subdivision or condominium, which had regulation that could be legally enforceable. But you may be next door to a property that hasn't gone through a Planning Act application in the last 10 to 15 years, and so therefore did not have the same protections. And so that's where we really started researching other options for how we could look at our waterfront more comprehensively. So that's where we turned our attention to tools that are available under the Municipal Act. And Darlene had covered some of this certainly earlier, so I won't repeat a lot of it. But really, the Municipal Act allows for a number of tools that extend beyond the Planning Act and don't require essentially a development application to trigger the use. So the Municipal Act does allow municipalities to pass bylaw that prohibit or regulate destruction of trees or injuring of trees, and also to regulate site alteration. And so a number of municipalities, and certainly in the research that I've been doing, where there is a predominance of waterfront planning, a lot of those municipalities are looking at packaging shoreline protection or shoreline tree preservation bylaws, or shoreline protection bylaws is often what they're called, where we're looking at regulating both the site alteration and managing the protection of vegetation, which is often the understory, as well as regulating the destruction and injuring of trees. So I know in my own work, I've looked to the work at the County of Haliburton, Muskoka Lakes, and also Township of Georgian Bluffs. So within a municipal act, a shoreline protection control bylaw can do a number of different things that provide, in my opinion, a more complete package of regulations and controls than what can sometimes happen in a little bit more of a piecemeal way through the Planning Act, and establish kind of more comprehensive areas. So the discussion that we were having in South Frontenac is the importance of the protection of tree cutting in proximity to the lakes, and are looking at those protections within 30 meters of the high water mark. The other thing that we were also doing in concert and are still looking at is looking at financial penalties. And so we find that financial penalties are an important way of addressing enforcement, and certainly getting information out to the public. There's more of a direct impact, and shoreline protection bylaws can help us put those financial penalties along with administrative financial penalties in place in a way that does not require us to initially have to undertake what is often several years of court action against property owners. So just one of the other aspects of this tool that I think is important to deal with those elements of enforcement. So with our shoreline protection bylaw work to date, so we have had reports go back to council be supportive of a resolution in terms of moving ahead with the creation of a shoreline tree preservation bylaw for the township. Staff have also worked with our Lake Ecosystem Advisory Committee. I had a series of conversations in terms of starting to prepare a draft bylaw. Also, kind of in this time frame, we've had locally a doubling of planning applications through 2021 and 2022, as well as also a tripling of our building permit and sewage permits. So staff acknowledged, and I'm sure if you asked our council, they hoped that this project would be farther ahead than it is at the current time. We're also looking at establishing and undertaking a new official plan at the same time. So we have a series of work that has happened in the last 2 years that have also coincided with our shoreline protection bylaws. So we have not got our bylaw into effect yet, but we are working on creating that draft bylaw to present to council with the input of our Lake Ecosystem Advisory Group. So components and considerations that we've been discussing with our Lake Ecosystem Group are the goals, definitions, what type of site alteration we want to regulate, as well as the vegetation removal. And I believe earlier it was maybe Darlene who had mentioned oftentimes these bylaws look at exemptions. So what type of shoreline alteration or what type of vegetation removal can occur without requiring a permit. Exemptions are extremely important to us in South Frontenac in the sense that our Lake Ecosystem Committee in particular, while they feel that there is regulation that's required in this area, they also don't want to over-regulate. And that is an important balance that we are trying to achieve with this bylaw in terms of putting in place the details that are specific enough in order to be able to do the enforcement through this bylaw, but very clearly hearing that our lake ecosystem members are concerned about the over-regulation of our waterfront properties and the perceived opposition to a bylaw such as this if folks feel that they are being over-regulated or too tightly restricted in terms of what they can do with their own property. So that will certainly be a very important consideration as we move forward with this bylaw. Also, putting with the bylaw, it needs to look at things such as inspections and orders, as well as financial penalties. And there is interest in putting significant financial penalties in place, rather than this being kind of a pay to play or removal bylaw. So those will definitely be important aspects as we move forward. Some of the goals that the committee has identified for this bylaw is to make sure that we're protecting against the loss of naturalized shorelines, also maintaining and protecting the natural riparian areas along both our rivers and streams. Our committee felt that it was important to regulate that 30 meters in proximity to the high water mark and regulate all aspects of vegetation, not just tree cutting. And as well to prevent significant alteration of the shoreline areas. You saw a couple of examples in the photos. Those are examples that we do not want to see clear cutting. We do not want to see that large fundamental site alteration happening along our waterfront. And also the importance of making sure that we're protecting fish habitat and ensuring that we're dealing with runoff, soil erosion aspects, and also recognizing that our waterfront and how we manage it also contributes to human health and enjoyment of our waterfront. So our next steps here in the township is that we have, working through our Lake Ecosystem Advisory Committee over the past year, we're going to take their input, start to craft a draft bylaw to present to council. We do know that we are in kind of a pre-election timeframe at the current time, so I'm not confident that this work will happen ahead of our election, but will likely be a priority to move into our next elected council. And we're setting the framework for this bylaw with our new official plan that we have just shared in the last month with our council as well. We would take our bylaw to council for consideration, and under their direction, then we would be undertaking public and agency consultation, as well as ultimately then moving ahead to prepare that final bylaw. So certainly, I think a lot of folks have raised the importance of having a robust public consultation process associated with these types of bylaws. And I think that you'll hear from perhaps some lessons through the County of Haliburton in terms of the importance of that public engagement. And so that will be a very significant kind of work item for our department moving ahead. So I'll leave it at that point and certainly welcome any questions that we may have for the presenters as a whole.
Thanks very much, Claire. There we go. I was just going to ask to stop sharing your screen. Thanks very much for that fantastic presentation. It's really great, I think, to see some of those challenging images for us to realize the real value and the real need in looking at a variety of tools that are available to protect our lakes and rivers. So that then sends us nicely into our third presentation from Stephen Stone, who is the planner for Haliburton County. And he'll be speaking to us about the work that his county has been doing, I believe, over the last few years to develop a shoreline preservation bylaw. And I believe Terry will be introducing Stephen.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Claire. That was a really thoughtful presentation. Yeah, excellent to see bad and what can be possible. So I'm pleased to introduce Stephen Stone. Steve grew up in Barrie and now lives in Victoria Harbour, steps away from Georgian Bay, where he's an avid outdoors person and kayaker. Spends many summers in the outer islands on the bay. And for those of us who are small lake people, it's a terrifying but beautiful prospect out on the bay. So lucky you. Steve studied environmental and rural planning at the Universities of Waterloo and Guelph, and he's been a director of planning in cottage country since about 2016. And he is currently overseeing the municipal plan review, climate change, and shoreline protection programs at the County of Haliburton. I'm really pleased you can join us today, Steve, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Terry, and to the group that called upon me to speak. I'm happy to do that. I'm going to try sharing my screen, and you'll have to allow me to do that, I guess. Let me know when I can.
You should be able to go ahead.
Yep.
There we go. All right.
So if you can see it, I'm just going to add to what Terry said. So when you're looking at Haliburton County, it's about 4,000 square kilometers in area, has 500 lakes. It's on the southern boundary of Algonquin Park, includes about 10 to 20% of the park actually in its municipal limits. We're a two-tier planning system here. We have 4 townships with their own official plans and zoning bylaws. The county is the approval authority for subdivisions, condos, and consents. And what's interesting with the 4 municipalities is they all have a range of zoning requirements, policy requirements when it comes to new lot creation, especially around the lakes. So the genesis for our shoreline bylaw is actually found in policy. And much like the other presenters, the rule of thumb is 30 meters from the high water mark. And so when we're dealing with new development through lot creation, what we do is we screen all these applications for compliance with policies. And ultimately, if it's in a sensitive environment, either on a lake trout lake or with wetlands on or near the property, we'll make them go through an environmental impact study and site evaluation report. And those form the basis for development agreements. So those would be section 51 of the Planning Act and 53 through consent approval. Those development agreements are supported and approved by the local township councils, and that forms the basis for creating lots on lakes. Our tree cutting bylaw also has the basis of that in policy, and that would be the 30 meters. The bylaw itself, I'll just share this for you now. The bylaw itself has been in existence in its current form since 2018. Some of the things were mentioned by Claire that she's doing in her bylaw are what forms the basis of our bylaw. What we're trying to do is sustain a healthy environment, maintain and improve ecosystems, prevent shore impacts like soil erosion, and also limit the effects of water runoff from terrestrial environments. As I said, it's 30 meters from the high water mark. We also have a woodlands bylaw that covers forestry practices, so it doesn't cover anything inland of our lakes and stream system. Some of the things that was mentioned about these bylaws would have exemptions to allow for hazard trees to be removed, pruning of trees, For the cottagers, they're really interested in having driveways or pathways to the shoreline. In our bylaw, 5 meters seems to be a standard width for a lot of things, including if you get a building permit, you're allowed to disturb the land around your footprint up to 5 meters from the foundation. In terms of other exemptions that we have, obviously there's the exemptions that the county and the municipalities enjoy. You can remove trees when you're dealing with Planning Act applications, but it would be subject to conditions within your site plan or your subdivision or development agreements. In terms of prohibitions, that's found in section 4 of the bylaw. And at the present time, our tree preservation bylaw doesn't require permits. And as I mentioned, we have 4,000 square meters of land to cover. We only have one forester who looks after the shoreline implementation. So if there's a complaint, he'll go out and look at that. He'll often assess the situation and deal with relief. If there is a significant impact that he has or a contravention of the tree protection bylaw, he will issue orders. And we approach enforcement in 2 different ways. And one of the amendments that happened in 2018 was to better define what a tree is. And so if the tree, even though it might look like a shrub, but if it can grow taller than 4.5 meters, you can actually issue a ticket for destruction of riparian vegetation where there's trees. And as I said, it's administered by one county forester at this time. So it's very challenging to cover the geographical area that we have. As was mentioned by Susan, we have been engaged in a review of our existing bylaw for since 2019. And there was extensive research undertaken by my predecessor, and more recently, council asked for a consultant to come in to assess that research and then do its own research and engage the public. And so that's been ongoing for 2 years now with the consultant, or I should say 1 year with the consultant. And there was extensive consultation with the community. And as a result of that consultation, some of the substantive changes that are being considered by council was actually a 20-meter buffer instead of the 30-meter that exists today. And it's broadening its application to include site alteration and not just tree preservation. And the issue, why that became an issue, is because a lot of concerned citizens were thinking that the tree preservation bylaw wasn't doing its thing because there was a lot of alteration of the shoreline that was happening. And in truth be known, we didn't regulate grading landscaping activities. So that's what they wanted to strengthen in this enhanced bylaw. And it's gone through its sort of public engagement process. It was presented in its draft form to council, and they've asked for a legal review. So just like Claire, it's probably not going to be approved by this council. It'll be a matter to be considered by our future council. So with that, I know time's of essence, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It was a great presentation to hear what Haliburton County is working on to protect your waterfronts. This is now a great opportunity to head into our Q&A with our panel of speakers. I see we've had a lot of questions and comments already popping up in the chat over the last couple of hours, and that's really great. There's a lot of interest and enthusiasm for this subject, so that's fantastic to see. Monica is going to be assisting with the Q&A panel discussion, and so I'll hand that over to you, Monica, if you wanted to select some of the questions and be open to any of the speakers that we've heard from this morning to answer.
Absolutely. So some of them came in for specific presentations, so I'll offer the question to that presenter first, but some of them were just general questions, so whoever feels like they have an answer for it. So the first one was a general question. What people thought was a bigger area to focus on, the vegetation along the shoreline or septic setback and proper septics?
I'll jump in on that one. I saw that question in the chat, so I've been thinking about it, and that's a hard one. Can I say both? I think that both are absolutely important. Septic reinspection programs, proper septic replacements. We've learned in the last several decades, we've learned a lot more about the geochemistry that goes on underneath when the septic effluent goes into the ground and how it reacts with the soils. We've learned a lot more from researchers at the University of Waterloo. And so that whole game has evolved, as well as the technologies that are out there, the advanced treatment systems that are now available to treat for phosphorus. They're now kind of on the market. So I think the septic part of it is important. It falls within that setback distance because, the septic system releases its effluent into the ground and goes to the water table. So it really doesn't, technically speaking, interact with that 30-meter buffer. That's more the overland runoff. But you've heard throughout all the discussions today the importance of that 30-meter buffer and the vegetated buffer to kind of do all the benefits that it has to protect that lake. So my answer is both.
Okay, and I see Brittany has her hand up to add to that.
Thank you. Yes, I would certainly concur with Victor on the both answer. And I just wanted to know that the Township of Rideau Lakes has both programs in place. So we have a mandatory septic reinspection program. And we also, of course, have our shoreline planting plan program. In terms of the septic reinspection program, something interesting I'd like to note is, so this program has been in place from about 2007 in our township, but it was voluntary for the first 10 years or so. And in the last couple of years, it's been made mandatory, and we've selected lakes, different lakes each year. And we've also went into some of our villages. And what we've been finding the last couple of years with the mandatory program, we're certainly finding a lot more failed systems. Likely, of course, those applicants who didn't want to participate, but were now required to participate. So what we're finding, of course, is there have been more failed systems, and then we're making sure that they're rectified. So it certainly has an impact, as a lot of those are waterfront properties. So again, my answer is both as well.
Okay, and then Claire, maybe you'll finish it off.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think part of it is also getting a really good handle on what are the processes and what are the policies in place and how those are being enacted in the municipality. I would say if there is, zero or very, very limited vegetation protection on your lakes, I would say that is a really important place to start. Septic reinspection is absolutely important, so certainly agree with Victor and Brittany. But if there's no protection in terms of your shoreline vegetation at all, that's probably a more manageable place maybe for a municipality to start looking at that, whereas a septic inspection program usually requires some additional resources beyond kind of incorporating things into their regular planning approvals. So if you're looking at divide and conquer, we know all municipalities are stretched right now. I would say put a little bit more emphasis around the vegetation removal piece, because we know that also helps capture those nutrients from the sewage systems. We also have the Ontario Building Code that municipalities rely on in terms of setbacks and replacements. So, so just a slightly different angle on the question, but I think, both are important, but if there's no protection of vegetation, that is where I would start.
Okay, and then kind of building on that with the divide and conquer. So one of the questions was about how enforcement is very tricky, especially for departments that feel that they're understaffed or underfunded. So do people have any strategies, kind of how these municipalities can properly monitor, each property or tree removal bylaws, strategies to try and be able to be as many places at once as possible?
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So, in my previous days with Seguin Township, one of the things that we would do with site plan control is we would retain securities for landscaping enhancements, shoreline protection. And that was an easy tool for us to ensure compliance. So if you asked for, we even had some securities as high as millions of dollars for rehabilitation plans. So that if you're thinking of site plan control, which has been mentioned as a tool to use, that's one way that you can ensure compliance with your bylaws or your monitoring of rehabilitation plans. So the one I spoke of actually required $5 million of re-landscaping, and we held securities to cover that, and they had a five-year performance for that landscaping. And so the consulting landscaper would do visual inspections every year and update us. And at the end of the period, he would sign off that the plan was implemented effectively. So,
can I add to that?
Sure thing.
I guess from my perspective, I'm not certain I agree with the premise. I think that municipalities are realizing a fair bit of revenue from development. Certainly there'll be a new impact assessment next year, and I think it's just a question of assigning the resources. I know that some municipalities can be conservative on this point, but it's not necessarily a resource intensive program. And I think Brittany's slide indicated that for a relatively small investment, one can secure a lot of leverage in terms of protecting the asset value of the lake. I mean, it's not a lot to ask. So I think that's what I would say from the perspective of our lake association. I mean, 2/3 at least, maybe close to 70% of waterfront revenue of provincial or municipal revenue comes from waterfront property. So all we're asking is a bit of reinvestment in terms of the lake, and to their credit, Rideau Lakes is providing that. But enforcement is enforcement, and there's nothing worse than a law in the books that's not being enforced. It just leads to cynicism and broader erosion of support for other laws. So it has to be enforced.
Claire, did you have something to add?
Yeah, thanks. To John's point, I think it's an element of priorities and resourcing. We know oftentimes, certainly in our township and many municipalities that I've worked in, it's the development cycle. It's the new applications that consume essentially all the resources that municipalities have. And so to start to look at essentially kind of getting focusing on the enforcement piece, it's looking at the resourcing. So certainly, we've been lucky, and as we've been modernizing our development services department here, that council has seen the value in terms of adding additional staff, putting in place comprehensive site plan review processes, detailed agreements, looking at where we shift the emphasis around reporting relative to compliance. So not dissimilar from what Steve was mentioning, and then being able to resource to do those site visits, those inspections. I think enforcement as a whole is probably an issue across many municipalities, and one of the most limiting challenges, or at least that I've encountered, is the challenge around the need to enforce our bylaws, often through the courts, which is a lengthy, time-consuming and financially, draining experience without a lot of dividends. So, looking to other tools such as administrative monetary penalty bylaws and other kind of new tools that are evolving in the municipal environment, I think is going to be another important aspect, in addition to resourcing and focusing, staffing around enforcement.
Okay, we'll go next to Darlene. There's a question for you. Has Watersheds Canada been engaged in reviewing the City of Kawartha Lakes draft consolidation of rural zoning bylaws, including shoreline setbacks and buffer zones?
Short answer, no. We haven't commented on draft bylaws. It doesn't mean we won't, but we currently have not.
Okay, no problem. Some presenters have mentioned, working collaboratively with waterfront associations and conservation areas and the municipalities, but not all of the people who are on this call have all of those different resources available to them. So someone was asking about how they could engage their municipality when there's no conservation authority in their area to set up tools to deal with shoreline buffers or shoreline development. And that can go to anyone.
I'll jump into that one just to kick it off. When in the past, when there was no conservation authority, it was Ministry of Natural Resources, and Northern Development, I guess, has been added onto that. The issue is that with the changing landscape politically, I'm not sure how that works anymore, but that used to be the natural fit to that, so that they would engage in the environmental side of things when a conservation authority was not within that jurisdiction. The other thing that I see that has happened is some of the upper tier municipalities have taken on that role of conservation authorities to because they recognize the need to fund the protection of lakes within their jurisdiction, because that is a main draw to the area economically, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. So I think I'll leave it at that and see if anyone wants to add to that.
Monica, I'm just thinking from, I don't know if Steve's still on the line, but my understanding is part of the premise behind the development of the Haliburton tree protection bylaw was a factor that at least parts of your geography, if not all of your geography, were limited in terms of having any formal conservation authority reviews.
Yeah, just to the two answers. We sort of assume the role of conservation authority with our shoreline protection program. We do have a small sliver of, I guess it's crow conservation in the, I guess it would be Highlands East, so the east part of the county. So we do partner with them on development, new development proposals. But yeah, we assume that role of the conservation authority.
Okay, and I think I'll try and sneak in one last question because it came through a couple of different ways. So this one specifically was from Hastings Highlands. So the seasonal residents probably make up about half of their population, and they're hearing common concerns about keeping that buffer, like they can't cut down a dangerous tree if it's in the buffer zone, or increased vegetation will lead to a higher risk of getting a tick bite. And so they're looking for kind of some advice on how they can answer these stakeholders. Do people know of existing resources that can help address some of these frequently found problems?
Would Arlene at Watersheds like to speak to some of the tools and resources that you have available? I saw some information being shared on the chat already.
Yeah, my mind goes all over the place when that kind of question comes up. We have so many resources. Chloe, feel free to jump in if I don't mention something, or Monica even. Speaking from the planning of Shorelines side of things, we are creating a lot of different resources in order to make the policy side of things a little bit more comprehensive. So we're trying to develop some support tools, some educational resources, speaking to the science of buffers, trying to help people kind of understand a step-by-step process on how to implement a buffer, and try to talk about and create some forums and stuff like that on how we can kind of discuss the common issues around waterfront development and stuff like that. I think we have a whole bunch of planting resources. I'm not sure if Chloe is on the line here, if she can speak to those. There's like wildflower guides, planting guides, all sorts of things.
Yeah, we have our habitat creation manual available on our website, as well as our wildflower garden guide. And we are working on a climate change resilient shoreline guide as well, for that will be available on our website. So we do have a lot of resources out there that that's available to everybody. I think, yeah, that's what I have. Mm-hmm.
And just a reminder, I might have failed to mention this at the outset, but the presentations and a pretty lengthy list of resources will also be shared, not only on the Watersheds Canada website when we're all done, but you'll also receive a direct email with the resources. So I think sort of all that together, hopefully there'll be some tools there that you can use as public education and outreach, maybe something that can be posted on your own website, or can be shared perhaps through community events as well.
Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that just so we can keep going.
I think Claire has her hand up there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was just won't take long, but just responding to that question. I know from my work here in the township and elsewhere that sometimes there can be miscommunication or assumptions that I sometimes affectionately call, kind of bylaw folklore, that kind of exists with communities when they may not necessarily have all the facts or all the information. So my experience is if there are folks that are uncertain what those requirements are, reaching out to your municipal office, staff such as myself, Brittany, Steve Stone, and others on our team, our Conservation Authority partners, are always happy to, communicate what a lot of the facts are around these types of regulations, and where there's flexibility as well. So I think it's important to try to connect with the right folks to get the most factual information to be able to share with your residents. And there's often folks that are there in the municipal office that can help you find that information and help with some of that communication as well. So don't be shy to reach out.
Okay, I think that that concludes our Q&A. I do apologize that we can't get through everyone's questions, but I know some of the questions we've been trying to answer in the chat. As well. So we're still consistently 15 minutes behind schedule. So that's not too bad. We do have just three presentations left. The quick presentations that are focused now more on the tools and resources that are available for use by the public, such as stewardship tools. So we'll be hearing first from Megan McDonald at the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority and Chloe Lajoie at Watersheds Canada. And they'll be speaking to us about some shoreline naturalization programs that they've been working on together, including some grant programs that are available. And I believe Hillary will be introducing Megan and Chloe.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear the next portion of the conversation. And so I'm pleased to introduce Megan McDonald. Megan McDonald has a background in environmental science, physical geography, and ecological restoration. Megan has been with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority for 11 years, where she works with public and private landowners to plant and enhance shorelines and natural areas. And I'm also pleased to introduce Chloe Lajoie. Chloe joined the team at Watersheds Canada in 2015 as a stewardship program assistant and is now managing the Natural Edge program, working with landowners to restore their shorelines. Chloe Lajoie is an outdoor enthusiast who has been studying and practicing environmental stewardship since 2009. She attended Nipissing University and graduated with an honors degree in environmental biology and technology. So Megan and Chloe, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Hillary. All right, can everybody see my slides there? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So Chloe and I from Watersheds Canada are going to present on some of our shoreline planting programs that are available. I know we're behind time, so I'll run quickly through the Rideau Valley program since it's specific only to the Rideau Valley watershed. So our shoreline naturalization program was established in 2009. It's one of 3 of our main stewardship programs at our CA, including tree planting and our Rural Clean Water Grants program. It was established to help support our lake communities after the end of our lake planning program in 2008. And the goal was to shift our resources from the planning support towards more on the ground stewardship projects to help support the more than 12,000 shoreline property owners we have in our watershed, as well as the many, many lakes and lake associations that go along with that. So our overall goal is to increase shoreline buffers in Rideau Valley to meet those goals that Mike and Victor talked about at the beginning of the webinar. So improving water quality, reducing stormwater runoff, increasing wildlife habitat, all that good stuff. And the key to our program has always been removing barriers. So what is preventing people from establishing these buffers, whether it be financial barriers, a lack of knowledge and education awareness, or just physically folks maybe not be able to get out there and do planting themselves. So what can we do to help get over those barriers? So our program provides advice and guidance. We also can provide complimentary site visits and custom planting plans for individual landowners. We provide access to subsidized native plants, mostly trees and shrubs, but trying to include some more flowering perennials for people. And we can even assist with planting. So we'll come to the property and do the planting for folks who need that additional support. And we do a cost share with the landowners where RBCA covers 75% of the costs and the landowners cover 25%. With additional potential for top-ups when we have extra funding available. Limits do apply for certain resources through our program. So in addition to our landowner support program, we also do other special projects and partnerships, like partnering with lake associations for bulk orders or special outreach projects if they are trying to promote a specific stewardship initiative on their lakes. We've done demonstration sites with signage so people can see what a natural shoreline looks like. We participate in community planning events, we do municipal partnerships. We also do compensation projects, development related. And recently we've been doing some more stewardship projects that are also going to help water quality. Like rain gardens, bioengineering projects, and even pollinator habitat projects. And as I mentioned, one of the things we do are these municipal partnerships, and that's our major one really has been our partnership with Rideau Lakes Township over the last couple of years to help them with their implementation of their shoreline planting requirements through redevelopment applications. So to date, we've planted over 13,000 native trees and shrubs along 35 kilometers of shoreline and have completed over 700 projects. Just go through a few before and after project examples of our projects. So this was a redevelopment application. You can see the setback was within that 30 meters, steep slope, having a lot of issues with geese and erosion. And trouble with sort of keeping this mowed lawn on a steep slope. So we did quite a bit of planting along that property. This is an example of a project in which they had an old retaining wall that was removed and replaced with riprap. Riprap, you know, not exactly the greatest natural solution, but we were able to help them soften the impacts of that rock with some upland planting. And here's another one that was more of a demonstration site on public lands at one of our local Parks Canada lock stations. You can see a kind of a common theme is that we don't do a lot of 30-meter projects. And ideally, we would like to see 30-meter buffers wherever we can. But seeing as we deal with a lot of redevelopment applications, or voluntary projects, we are seeing smaller buffers, but important nonetheless. Everything counts, and if we can get, you know, a 1 to 2 to 3 meter buffer, it's better than no buffer at all. We also are seeing a lot of focus on low growing shrubs. So I think a lot of people get scared off with the shoreline naturalization and thinking that, you know, there are going to be a lot of trees, you're going to lose your views, and you're not going to be able to use your shoreline. And we've been finding a lot of people have been using low grow shrubs like sweetgale, our native honeysuckles, wild roses, things that only grow up to be about a meter and a half in height. And it seems to be a really good compromise for folks who are on the fence of shoreline buffers and losing kind of what they're used to. So as I said, our program is only available in Rideau Valley, unfortunately, but there are lots of other resources out there. There's lots of guides, planting plan templates, species lists. There are native plant nurseries right across Ontario. Ferguson Tree Nursery in Kemptville is our main supplier, but there are many others, and they seem to be growing in popularity, so the plants are becoming more and more available. Our program, we have been fortunate to have a small municipal levy support through the Conservation Authority, and we've been able to grow that over the years through support from our other existing stewardship programs, landowner contributions, full cost recovery development compensation projects, partnerships with our Rideau Valley Conservation Foundation, and just general donations. And also special fundraising opportunities, such as the TD Friends of the Environment, Community Foundation of Ottawa, and various federal and provincial grants that have been available throughout the years, like the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund, Eco Action Community Fund, Great Lakes Guardian, and others as they arise. So outside of Rideau Valley, a lot of that funding is available to larger partner groups. And other CAs also have programs available. While they might not have a full service program like we do, I've been happy to hear that many of them do offer support through small grants, through things like their forestry program or their rural clean water program. And then outside of our watershed, Watersheds Canada's Natural Edge program is a really great option for people. And I'm going to let Chloe kind of take the stage to tell you guys more about that program.
Thanks, Megan. Perfect. So again, thank you so much for having me, and thanks, Megan. We run a very similar program as she does, but we just run it outside of the Rideau watershed throughout Eastern Ontario. And we actually have partners all across Canada that are delivering it as well. So our Natural Edge program focuses on working with landowners to naturalize their shoreline using native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. We started our program back in 2013, and we actually built it as a follow-up to our Love Your Lake program. So Love Your Lake is an educational program where waterfront property owners would receive a property report going over the health of their shoreline. And we found that the next step was to provide a program that would help landowners take action to naturalize and better their shoreline. And surveys show that people value our freshwater and all that it provides us. However, we see a disconnect with their actions. So we've identified a lack of knowledge and know-how, as well as physical and financial ability as main barriers to landowners. So by providing the guidance and some financial support, it really helped landowners take this next step. And it's now taken off to where we offer it to any waterfront property owner within our delivery region. The ultimate goal of this program is to increase the number of shoreline restoration projects that take place. And this will lead to cleaner waters, resilient shorelines, and an increase in wildlife habitat. It also works to educate landowners about maintaining a natural riparian zone and their role as shoreline stewards and caring for their shorelines. So we work one-on-one with landowners to design their natural shoreline. We start off with a site visit where we meet with landowners on site and walk their shoreline with them. And here gives us the opportunity to discuss any issues we see, such as erosion, and what can be done. And then if planting is recommended, they can then purchase our Natural Edge starter kit, and we'll start by making a custom planting plan. And I know it was mentioned, but when designing a plan, we always take into consideration where their views are, their pathways and seating areas. And then we aim for 75% of their shoreline to be naturalized and go back to a natural state. And then the landowners keep 25% for them. And that's going to be their water access points. So each kit comes with 50 native plants and all the materials needed, such as hemp fiber mats, mulch for wildflowers, and tree guards. And I'd also like to note that if landowners want more than 50 plants, then we'll include that in the plan as well. They just pay for those at cost. So then we take care of ordering all of the plants and materials, assembling the kits, and we arrange for the landowner to pick up and plant it themselves. And we encourage landowners to plant themselves because we find they're more invested and take care of the plants afterwards, since they were the ones that put all the work into planting them in the first place, and they know where each plant is at that point. However, if they do want help with the planting, then we can help them out with that, no problem, but we just do it for a fee. So the majority of our plantings have been on residential properties where we work directly with the landowner. However, we also work with municipalities at public planting demonstration sites. So just like with Megan, it's always great, like planting at a public part is a great way to educate the community. We invite residents to come out and volunteer with us so that they can learn about the importance of shoreline naturalization, take part in a planting, and actually learn how to properly plant. And it also encourages them to now take this knowledge with them and do it on their own shoreline. And we also like to install an educational sign so that anybody visiting the park afterwards can learn about the project and the importance of it. So far, we've planted over 90,000 native plants and restored over 177,000 square meters of riparian habitat. So like I said, we deliver here in Eastern Ontario, but how we've built our program is more of a program in a box. So our goal is to share our program with communities and organizations all across Canada to increase the number of shoreline restoration projects that take place. Because we believe that local organizations are the best people to engage their shoreline property owners. So by providing a ready-to-go program in a box, we hope more organizations will deliver the program in their area. So the program provides partners with everything they need to run the program, including our custom-built Natural Edge app with online software. We've also built our native plant database, and then all of our communication and marketing materials. So they'll get a copy of our brochure with all of their organization's info on it, copies to our educational booklets, even sample media releases or sample grants to help them if they're trying to source funding. And then of course we offer training and ongoing support. And we currently have partners in BC, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick. So we developed our Natural Edge app, and this is kind of key when sharing it with these other organizations. So our app really streamlines the process of creating our restoration plans. It guides the plan designer to create a plan suitable for each site. We've also built our native plant database, which is available to the public on our website, but it's also integrated into our app. And that's what we use to help select suitable plants for each site. And our database is based off of Canada's plant hardiness zone. So not only are the plants suitable or chosen for the soil type, moisture level, sunlight availability, things like that, but also based on location. And we found our app to be very effective because the plans can be created on site with the landowner. They get to help choose the plants, choose the placement so that they're getting a plan they're really happy with right away. And we get them signed on for a planting at the following planting season. And here are just a few quick photos. Like Megan said, most of the sites that we go out to, we don't actually have a 30 meters to work with. So our buffers typically aren't that large. And so you can see here, these are kind of two different takes because all of our landowners that really take part are all voluntary. So they're doing this on their own. And you can see here on the picture of the right, they've just let it go natural, created a no-mow zone, and now they just kind of mow and use that one little area for their seeding. They have a little, I think, chimney there too, and that's how they access the water. And then the photo on the left, again, they didn't have 30 meters that they could go back with. They wanted to keep some lawn for themselves. So what we did was that we planted, and then afterwards they created this rock border, and they've left that as their buffer. And they also started leaving all of the aquatic vegetation in place. So they have a nice aquatic vegetation buffer, and then it goes up into a lot of shrubs as well. And then they had some trees placed kind of in the upland area. So we do have a few delivery partners here in Ontario. So we have the Land Between for the Haliburton area, Muskoka Watershed Council, Kawartha Lake Stewards Association, Quinte Conservation. We're just starting now with Junction Creek Stewardship Committee up in Sudbury. And we also work with the Muskrat Watershed Council around Cobden. And we, Megan already went over all of the different funding types. So we use various federal and provincial grants. Also, our landowner contributions go back into the program, as well as we apply to various private foundations. And then one last thing I would like to go over is the lake protection booklet or workbook. So this is an educational tool that helps property owners make improvements to their shorelines, and it provides information about lake protection. This was produced by the Lake Lakes Planning Committee in 2019 with collaboration and review from many organizations. And if you don't know, Lake Links is a one-day workshop held every October that addresses the lake and river issues that matter most to our communities, with expert speakers, breakout sessions, and dynamic presentations. So this lake protection workbook includes a series of questions that will help landowners assess how well they are protecting their property and lakefront through everyday actions. It also provides practical information, recommendations, and spaces for recording improvements to assist them in their lake protection efforts. I would like to note that the workbook is not a replacement for a technical evaluation or in-person assessment by a professional, but it is an educational tool drawing attention to important aspects of lake protection. And anybody can download a copy for free, or to order a physical copy is just $2 plus shipping. We're currently getting more printed, so we should have more available this coming summer. And that's it for me. So if anybody has any questions for me, I know we're running out of time, so feel free to reach out afterwards and I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Thanks so much, Megan and Chloe, for that great presentation overview of, I had no idea there was that many tools, resources, sort of stewardship tools and resources for the municipalities or for property owners, and that the reach was that significant across the country. That's fantastic. Now we do have Haley Esden from the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority did have a quick presentation that was going to speak a little more details about the lake protection workbook. So I'll look to Haley to see if you wanted to give that presentation, or if you felt the last couple of slides there that Chloe presented sort of covered what you're going to speak to about the lake protection workbook.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, and thanks, Chloe, for introducing that. I do have a few, I guess, more in-depth bits of information about the lake protection workbook, so I could kind of skim through some of my slides and go into some detail there. We'll just work on sharing my screen first. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
All right, so I am just going to provide a quick introduction to the lake protection workbook, as well as a brief update about another lake information tool created by Cataraqui Conservation's Watershed Science staff that may be of interest. So, as Chloe mentioned, the Lake Protection Workbook is a self-assessment tool for shoreline property owners that determines how well property management practice protects the lake, provides concise and practical information about best management practices, and includes key resources to improve shoreline habitat and protection. And it was created by the Lake Links Planning Committee using multi-organizational expertise and input from agencies like conservation authorities, Watersheds Canada, stewardship groups, and more. So as Chloe mentioned, the workbook prompts you to answer a series of questions sort of about general information about your property and to reflect on how your actions might be affecting the health of the lake. You would then calculate your score and use that to consider ways that you could improve shoreline protection and lessen negative effects on your surroundings. So I'll just give you a little overview of sort of the key topics that the workbook focuses on. There are 9 areas that the workbook asks you about. So that includes lawns and gardens, recreation, shorelines, wetlands, wildlife, docks and boathouses, sewage systems, light pollution, and runoff. And on this slide, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but I've included an excerpt of the questions for lawns and gardens. So basically you just go through and kind of self-reflect and answer yes or no to the questions and then calculate your score. Now on this slide, I've included an excerpt of the score summary from the workbook. So the total score you get in each section provides you with guidance on whether your property could do with a little improvement or if you're already an excellent steward of the natural environment. If you score in the moderate to needs improvement ranges, don't be discouraged because there are a number of ways outlined in the workbook that you can improve your score that in many cases are pretty easy to undertake. So these measures include things like reducing mowing, leaving down logs on the ground, or eliminating the use of lead weights and lures while fishing. So to get a copy, again, it's available online through either Watersheds Canada website or the Cataraqui Conservation website. Watersheds Canada also offers a printing service for $2 plus shipping costs. And I believe there are plans for the Lake Links Committee to try and do some more bulk printing in the future. But until then, just please visit these web pages and have a look at the workbook. Copies of the workbook could be made available at municipal offices, cottagers association meetings, or really any venue that might reach waterfront property owners. And we'll also be providing links to the workbook in our follow-up information package. So don't worry if you haven't copied them down from this slide. Now, since we're on the subject of online stewardship and information tools, I thought I'd also take a moment to mention another more recently created online tool available on Cataraqui Conservation's website. The Lake Reporting Dashboard is a web-based tool created by our Watershed Science staff that contains detailed information about lakes within Cataraqui Conservation's watershed. This information includes lake characteristics like water depth and surrounding soil types and how impacted or vulnerable the lake is. And the dashboard also has information about what can be done to protect lakes, which really includes a lot of the key points we've been discussing here today, like preserving and enhancing native shoreline vegetation. Just want to reiterate that really each one of us can contribute to improving the health of lakes, and many small positive actions can add up to big improvements on the landscape. And there's really a wealth of information available on the dashboard. So if you live or own property in Cataraqui Conservation's watershed, or if you're interested in possibly developing a similar tool in your area, I really encourage you to take some time to explore the information. And I also want to note that having the ability to continue collecting this type of data on lake health over time is really critical for monitoring changes to lake health and informing development decisions in the future. And this dashboard can be found on the same page of Cataraqui Conservation's website as the Lake Protection Workbook. Okay, so hopefully this short little presentation has provided you with some useful information about a couple of readily available tools that can be used to better understand and improve lake health, both within Cataraqui Conservation's watershed area and across all other watersheds. My contact information is available on this slide, and our general webpage contact is there as well. So if you've got any questions about these tools, just let us know. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Haley. That was great, and thanks to everyone for sticking with us as we run a little bit over time. We will be wrapping up just within the next few minutes, I promise. I hope you guys have found these sessions, these various presentations helpful for your local community. So we'll just finish off with a quick presentation by Mike Yee at the RBCA, and he'll be speaking to us just about an additional tool or resource, I guess might be a good description. They are the Site Evaluation Guidelines for Waterfront Development. And these guidelines were developed based on a 2014 report by Hutchison's Environmental Services that was done for Mississippi Valley Conservation Authorities, Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, and the Cataraqui region. So we have a few minutes on that, and then we'll wrap it up with a few closing remarks and next steps. Thanks very much, Mike.
Okay, so I'm having problems with my dashboard here, so I'm just trying to sort of get that queued up. I guess what I have, maybe what I'll do is I'll try and go through this. This is the report that was produced, and it was done in 2014, and we got Hutchison Environmental to take a look at the site evaluation guidelines, which were created in 1992 through the Rideau Lake study. And what it is we've been talking about 30-meter buffer. And what this is this a setback tool. So what it's looking at is it's looking at criteria to speak to what Victor was talking about. How far should you be set back based on your geophysical, I guess, properties on the lot that you're on. So, so I am going to try and get to. Sorry about that. I had another thing queued up. So what it is these are the criteria, and it's based on soil conditions, slope class, and site drainage. So so these and vegetation. So these criteria will give you a score, and the idea then is this is the criteria that we have. So soil depth, soil texture, slope, and vegetation. And much like the guide that Haley was presenting last, you get a point score, and so the idea that if you've got a steeper slope, then you really should be set back a little further. So it's got a greater score to it. Or if your soil depth is very, very shallow, then again, you're not going to have that absorptive capacity to sort of deal with the stormwater. Or if you have very little vegetation or it's very disturbed, then again, you're going to have a higher score, and that would set you to a a higher score that gives you a greater horizontal distance. And so this tool has been used and accepted at the OMB, OLT, or whatever iteration it has now become. And it's based on science, and based on these science criteria, what it does is it then tells you what the setback should be on some of these more challenging slopes. So we just wanted to present this to let municipalities know that on some of the challenging sites that you have, the 30 meters really may not be good enough. And so to give that 30 meters more sort of a resonance to people that are fighting to not even maintain a 30, then you have this tool available to say, based on science, this is actually where you should be. So this will be part of the package that goes out, so that if people haven't seen it, they can get a better idea of what this entails, and how it may be used as a tool to help you with, I guess, your properties that are more challenging. And really, what it is I look at this whole workshop as just sort of us trying to get people to say, what can we leave to better protect lakes? How far back can we should we be set back to better protect lakes? And I think a lot of it is education and awareness, so that people know that the vegetation that's on the shoreline isn't just some ugly plant to cut out because they don't like it, that it serves a function. And so I think the dialogue has to go with people talking to their neighbors and saying, hey, look, it might be a good idea to leave some of that because it's going to protect our lake in the long run. Because what I hear these days is people hate weeds, right? Macrophytes, to those of us in the biology world. If you hate weeds, I guarantee you're going to hate algae even more. And so rather than a macrophyte dominated lake, you don't want to go to an algae dominated lake, because that's a whole different system, and nobody's going to be happy with that. And vegetative buffers is an easy solution to keep lakes resilient and not moving that way. So I'll turn it back over to you, Susan, and you can wrap this up. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was really helpful to learn about other tools that are available within the those conservation authorities to support science-based decision-making for local municipalities. So that does indeed conclude our webinar for today. I sincerely appreciate the level of interest that we've had by the number of registrants for this webinar, the incredible engagement. We've seen a lot of activity on the chat function, and that has been fantastic to see as well. And it is heartening to see positive feedback from you as well in your remarks about the presenters today and the information that you've received. So really our kind of take-home message here today, we know there is no perfect one-size-fits-all solution to be tackling waterfront development and the lakes of the health of lakes and rivers. And really it's this situation varies based on local needs and concerns. But we do feel that policy and planning tools do provide means by which healthier environments and healthier freshwater ecosystems can be improved, not only sort of the longer term, but also can be improved in the short term as well. That can respond to challenges around nutrient loading, the development of blue-green algae, the overall health of the water, and mitigating the effects of climate change. And of course, we all know that this is therefore interconnected to a community and local residents' quality of life. It's interconnected with tourism, ecotourism, as we've seen from some of the presentations, directly related to homeowners' property value, scenic quality of the community as well. So we do think that some of the information presented today demonstrates that there are key steps that can be taken to make things progressively better for the long term. And we feel that policies and guidance are key steps towards supporting and realizing healthy environments on the water. So we do hope that the information that's been shared here today, as well as some of the examples that we've seen in the municipalities that are already in place or in development, will help you in your local area to work towards implementing some of those tools and resources that you've heard from today to either retain and protect or restore or remediate your shorelines. So with that, I did want to say thank you to Mike as the champion for this workshop. A very sincere thank you to all the members of the organizing committee. We all kind of pooled our resources to pull this off. And a very sincere thank you to the speakers, as well to all of you who have shared your morning and a bit of your lunch hour with us. So I do really, really appreciate your participation and all the questions and comments that you've sent along the way. As we mentioned earlier, the information that's been shared here today, as well as the presentation itself, will be available on Watersheds Canada's website, and you will also receive a direct email with links to all the tools and resources that have been shared today that you can take back to your local community, your lake association, your council, your colleagues and staff to talk about what could work for your local area. And within that email, you'll also receive, if you haven't already in the chat, you'll receive a link to a very quick online survey about this webinar. So I think that with that concludes our session for today. So again, thank you very much. I had a fantastic time, and I hope all of you enjoyed the webinar as well. And please do visit the Watersheds Canada. Has some great workshops in the past that have been done, and I know we're available on the website, and I think they've got some workshops coming up as well. And conservation authorities as well have great resources on their website.